Welcome to Sleep from History, where the past drifts in like candle smoke and settles quietly in your thoughts. Tonight we're stepping into the curious courts and crowded market squares of medieval Europe, where laws were less about justice and more about theater. Imagine the sound of iron bells echoing through narrow streets, the smell of straw and damp stone in a village courtroom, or the flicker of torches throwing long shadows on a wooden scaffold. You might picture yourself there standing barefoot on the cold ground, heart thudding as the crowd stares. Here's the truth you wouldn't last a day. Justice in the Middle Ages could mean carrying red-hot iron with bare hands drowning in a pond, to prove innocence or watching a pig dressed in trousers being hanged for murder. Yes, that actually happened. Before we dive in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these sleepy journeys into history. And please drop your location and local time in the comments. We're weaving a gentle map of listeners across the world. Now let's drift together into the strange laws of medieval Europe, bizarre, brutal, and unforgettable. Imagine yourself standing in the cobbled square of Falaise, Normandy in the year 1386. The air is damp, the stones under your bare feet are slick with morning mist, and the smell is unmistakable. Pig dung mixed with wood smoke, sweat, and straw. You push through the crowd until you see the accused, a pig squealing and thrashing, dragged by a rope tied roughly around its neck. Its snout is smeared with mud. Its small black eyes dart wildly as if it somehow knows that today it is not livestock, it is a murderer. The crime, the pig had killed a child. The villagers whisper, some crossing themselves nervously. A priest intones prayers while the judge, draped in heavy velvet robes that smell faintly of mildew, reads the charges in solemn Latin. The absurdity hits you. A pig, illiterate in every sense, is being tried like a human. Worse, it is dressed in a crude tunic and breeches the kind of clothing a peasant child might wear. The effect is grotesque, like a carnival parody, except no one is laughing. For medieval people, this was not a joke. To them, sin poisoned all creation. A pig that killed had to be punished, or else God's order would unravel. Ignoring the crime meant risking further calamity. Failed. Harvest sick livestock, divine wrath. So they treated it with all the pomp of a murder trial. There is even a defense lawyer, though his arguments the pig acted from hunger, not malice, convince no one. When the verdict is pronounced, death by hanging, you feel the tension ripple through the crowd. Some mutter justice. Others look away uneasy. The pig is dragged to the scaffold, the noose thrown over its snout. The squeals are shrill, pitiful echoing between the timbered houses. For a moment, you almost think you hear the cry of a child, high-pitched, desperate. Then the rope tightens, the body jerks, and silence falls, except for the creak of rope against wood. And here's the strangest part. The villagers sigh with relief. They believe balance has been restored. To us, it's insanity. To them, it's law, theater, and survival all rolled into one. If you ever thought your modern justice system was inefficient, remember at least you've never seen a pig in pants swinging from the gallows. Now shift scenes, it's summer sweltering. You're crammed inside a small stone church where the air smells of sweat, candle wax, and mildew. Buzzing fills the rafters. Locusts, beetles, and caterpillars swarm the fields outside, threatening to strip them bare. The villagers, desperate and terrified, do what they know best. They sue the insects. A cleric presides, his voice booming with ritual gravitas. He recites the charges. The insects stand accused of destroying crops and endangering human life. The villagers nod solemnly, though a few children can't help but giggle until their mothers smack them on the back of the head. But to the adults, this is deadly serious. If the insects are not judged and condemned, God might withhold his mercy. Believe it or not, the bugs have a defense lawyer. He stands before the altar arguing that these creatures are God's own handiwork, acting only on natural instinct. Why should they be punished for doing what they were created to do? Across from him, the prosecution demands excommunication. Yes, even insects could be formally cursed by the church. The trial drags on for hours. Witnesses testify, the worms devoured my barley, the beetles destroyed my vineyard. You stifle a laugh, but the weight of fear presses heavy in the air. Hunger is no joke. If the crops vanish, children will starve. At last the verdict comes. The insects are cursed and ordered to leave the parish fields. Priests chant, holy water is sprinkled, and villagers clutch rosaries with trembling hands. Do the insects obey? Of course not. But the ritual gives people something priceless: hope. For a brief moment, they can believe they have done something, anything, to push back against chaos. In the buzzing heat, you realize the trial is less about insects and more about human desperation. The need to feel that someone, even bugs, can be held accountable. Picture a church bell, massive bronze green with age. When struck, it booms so loudly the sound seems to rattle your ribs. But after a storm killed 2 villagers during its tolling, suspicion turned toward the bell itself. The verdict of the local court: guilty. You watch as solemn clerics stand beneath the tower, reading the charges. The bell caused death, invited lightning. It is to be punished. Some argue it should be melted down. Others say exile. Yes, exile for a bell. The absurdity borders on comedy, yet no one laughs. In other cases, swords that killed were banished from kingdoms. Trees that fell and crushed passers-by were chopped down as criminals. To the medieval imagination, there was no true inanimate. Everything carried moral weight, everything could betray. As the bell is carted away, creaking on a wooden wagon, villagers spit at it, muttering curses. Mothers clutch children tighter. You realize this is ritual, not logic? To punish the object is to draw a line to say chaos is not welcome here. It's like a placebo for justice. And though the bell is just bronze, its exile eases fear the way a scapegoat always does. Leaving the square, you smell wood smoke from hearths and hear the clatter of blacksmiths hammering iron. Behind you, echoes of squealing pigs and tolling bells still linger in your ears. You can't decide whether to laugh or shudder. To modern eyes, these trials are theater of the absurd. Yet to medieval villagers, they were deadly serious survival strategies. In a world where famine, plague, and storms loomed at every turn, people believed every creature and object was part of God's order. If that order cracked, the law stitched it back together. Blaming a pig or a bell wasn't madness. It was a desperate attempt to wrestle control from chaos. And though their methods look ridiculous, the emotion behind them feels familiar. Haven't we too searched for scapegoats when things collapse? Haven't we blamed the system, the weather, or even bad luck when tragedy strikes? The absurdity lies not in their fear, but in how they dressed it in robes and rituals, turning cosmic anxiety into legal theater. And as you drift deeper into their world, you can almost hear the judge's gavel, striking wood the priest chanting curses at bugs, the rope tightening around a squealing pig. Strange, brutal, bizarre, but profoundly human. And so you walk onward, leaving behind the echoes of animal squeals and bronze bells, stepping now into another corner of medieval justice where God himself was believed to judge guilt through firewater and combat. You leave behind the memory of pigs in tunics and bells on trial, stepping deeper into the strange maze of medieval justice. If animals and objects could be judged, why not let God himself act as the final witness? That was the reasoning, and so came the Ordeals rituals, where the divine was expected to speak through firewater or flesh. Picture a stone church at dawn. The air smells of wax and incense, heavy, almost suffocating. A crowd gathers their boots, scraping against the cold floor. At the center upon the altar lies a bar of iron, glowing red in the dim candlelight. The heat radiates so strongly that even from a distance your skin prickles. A priest chants Latin prayers, sprinkling holy water on the weapon. This is no blacksmith's forge, it is a courtroom, and you are the accused. The charge may be theft heresy or a petty squabble over land, but evidence is flimsy, and so the truth must be revealed by ordeal. You are told, pick up the iron, walk 9 paces, and place it down. Then your hand will be wrapped in linen and sealed. After 3 days, the bandage will be removed. If the burn is clean, smooth, and miraculously healing, you are innocent. If pus or rot festers, you are guilty. You stretch your trembling hand toward the glowing bar. The heat burns before you touch it, and when your skin finally makes contact, the sizzle is unmistakable. The horrifying sound of your own flesh cooking. The smell fills your nostrils, sharp and nauseating like roasting meat turned rancid. The crowd gasps. You stumble 1 step, then 2, then 3, each stride stretching into eternity. 9 paces feel like 9 centuries. Finally, the iron is set down. The priest murmurs blessings as the bandage is tied tight around your blistered palm. Your teeth chatter, though not from cold. 3 days later, the cloth is unwrapped before the gathered villagers. Infection has already set in. The skin is raw, oozing, covered with angry yellow pus. You are declared guilty. In a world without antiseptics or soap healing was rare. The ordeal of hot iron was less about divine justice than divine roulette. Even the innocent were doomed by bacteria. But to the medieval mind, this was certainty God would not let the innocent suffer. Never mind that your hand looks like scorched pork. It was in its own twisted way a medieval lie detector. Except instead of wires and electrodes, you had a branding iron, and instead of failing the test, you lost your hand. Or your life. Step outside the church now into the biting wind that cuts across the fields. A crowd gathers near a river, muddy banks slick beneath their boots. The sky is gray water, black smelling of algae and decay. You are bound with coarse rope at wrists and ankles. A priest blesses the river, declaring it pure, and here's the fatal logic: water being holy will accept the innocent. If you sink, you are innocent but dead. If you float, the water rejects you, and you are guilty. The villagers murmur, breath misting in the air. Some pity you. Others rub their hands, eager for spectacle. The guards shove you forward. The water swallows you whole, icy cold, stabbing your chest like knives. Bubbles rush from your lips. You fight to hold your breath, but your lungs scream. And then you bob back up buoyant. The crowd erupts, guilty. Dragged gasping to shore, you cough river water until bile burns your throat. The priest nods. The water has spoken. Punishment will follow. You can't help but notice the absurdity. Survival equals guilt. Drowning equals innocence. It's a test only an idiot or a sadist could design. But to them, it was gospel. History is full of such ordeals. In England during the 12th century, women accused of witchcraft were tossed into ponds, sometimes strapped to chairs. In Bamberg, Germany, records tell of dozens who floated and were condemned, and yet the water test persisted for centuries. Why? Because it was theater. A spectacle to reassure a terrified community that someone, anyone, could be blamed. To you standing shivering on the riverbank, it feels less like divine judgment than a grotesque game of survival like medieval swimming lessons. Except death was your instructor and the final grade was execution. As the crowd disperses, whispers drift. Some swear they saw demons in the ripples, others mutter that your eyes looked guilty. The truth doesn't matter. The ritual has spoken. In their minds, the village is safer now. And you, trembling, dripping wrists burning from rope marks, realize in this world, innocence is irrelevant. What matters is performance, whether God appears to favor you. And next comes the harshest spectacle of all trial by combat. The riverbank fades, replaced by the wide trampled field outside a stone castle. The grass is flattened into a circle ropes strung to keep back the crowd. This is not a festival or a market. This is a trial. The charge, murder, treason, or some bitter dispute over land will be decided not by testimony but by blood. You feel the weight of the helmet pressed on your head, the stench of sweat baked into the padding. Metal gauntlets bite at your wrists. Across from you stands your accuser's sword, glinting in the pale sun. Nobles recline on benches, murmuring behind silk gloves, while peasants jostle for a better view, mud squelching beneath their clogs. Children perch on shoulders to watch justice unfold wide-eyed. To them, this is theater as much as law. A priest raises a crucifix blessing both fighters. The theory is simple: God will grant victory to the righteous. But you know better. God doesn't swing the sword, you do. And your opponent has trained since childhood. His stance is steady, shield firm. Yours wavers. The crowd falls silent. Then the horn blows. The first clash rattles your bones. Steel against steel, the vibration travels up your arms, numbing your fingers. Each breath inside the helmet is hot, suffocating. The world narrows to the hiss of blades and the pounding of your own heart. You stumble the mud, slick beneath your boots, and the jeers rise. He falters. He falters. One blow strikes your shoulder, the weight staggering you. You taste blood where your teeth cut your tongue. Another swing, another impact until your arms ache, muscles trembling. Across the field, your opponent barely seems winded. God may be watching, but your lungs are burning, your body failing. When the blade finally pierces your side, hot pain flares, stealing your breath. You collapse, mud seeping into your wounds. The crowd exhales as one, the verdict delivered. Your accuser raises his sword triumphant. Justice, they say, has been served. This was the grim reality of trial by combat. In theory, anyone could demand it, peasants, women, even the elderly. In practice, it favored the strong, the trained, the wealthy who could hire professional champions. In 1203, Robert de Montfort lost his life in such a duel, accused of murder in a wool trade dispute. His opponent, a skilled knight, struck him down quickly. The crowd nodded in satisfaction. God had spoken. But had he? Or was it simply that swords and training mattered more than divine justice for many? It was both law dressed as ritual, brutality dressed as faith. You can't help thinking it was less a trial and more a medieval UFC match, where the loser didn't just tap out, he died. The combat field lingers in your mind as the crowd disperses, chatter filling the air. Some shake their heads, muttering that the loser was guilty. Others simply seem entertained. Children mimic sword strokes with sticks, laughing. And you realize ordeals were not just law. They were public theater binding a community together through shared fear and spectacle. Imagine being a villager watching these trials. Each case was a performance where the stakes were life and death. Fire seared flesh, water swallowed lungs, swords split bone. It was horrifying, yet captivating. People came from miles around to watch. Executioners knew their craft like entertainers, priests staged the ceremonies like directors. For the medieval mind, justice had to be seen to be believed. But beneath the spectacle was deep terror. Anyone could be accused. A neighbor's whisper of feud or bad luck could land you at the center of the stage. The threat kept people obedient. Fear was the glue that held order. Yet, strangely, ordeals also gave hope. They offered a chance, however slim, that God might intervene. A thief might survive the iron. A widow might win in combat through a champion. A desperate villager might sink and be declared innocent, even if at the cost of breath. To a world without modern evidence or forensics, this felt like certainty. The soundscape stays with you. The crackle of iron in the church, the splash of bodies in rivers, the clang of swords in muddy fields. The smell of burned flesh, wet wool, and sweat-soaked armor lingers. The sight of crowds gasping, crossing themselves, children clinging to their mothers. It was horror dressed as ritual, but it gave people structure. And as you drift from this chapter, the realization settles heavy. Ordeals were not accidents of history. They were tools of control, of fear, of communal reassurance. They remind us how fragile justice can be when belief outweighs evidence, when spectacle replaces truth. You walk onward into the medieval world, leaving behind the fires, rivers, and battlefields. Ahead lies another chapter of strange justice professions, cursed yet needed men who killed at dawn and healed by noon. The paradox of medieval executioners awaits. As the echoes of clashing steel fade and the villagers drift back to their cottages, you are left with a strange silence. Not the silence of peace, but the heavy quiet that follows a storm. These ordeals by fire, by water, by combat were not just trials. They were wounds carved into the collective memory of every village. Imagine the child who watched a pig squeal on a gallows, then saw her uncle's blistered hand unwrapped after the hot iron test. For years she will dream of the smell of burnt flesh. Imagine the widow whose brother drowned in a river to prove his innocence. She will hear the splash every time she draws water from a well. Justice did not end with verdicts. It lingered like smoke in the rafters, a shadow that pressed on every mind. These ordeals functioned as a kind of mass theater of fear. People learned lessons: stay obedient, keep silent, don't anger your lord, don't attract suspicion. The law was not blind, it was wide-eyed and staring, ready to consume you. The message was simple: survival depended less on truth than on your ability to endure pain or the favor of God, or perhaps just luck. In this world, the psychological toll was immense. Villagers lived with constant dread that a wrong word, a bitter neighbor, or pure chance could place them under the priest's gaze or a judge's whim. Innocence offered no shield. Your only defense was invisibility. Better to bow your head, avoid notice, and pray the ordeal never reached your doorstep. And yet, here's the irony: despite their cruelty, ordeals offered a perverse kind of reassurance. To medieval minds, they proved the universe wasn't random. If someone floated in water, it wasn't physics, it was God speaking. If a hand festered, it wasn't bacteria, it was divine judgment. These rituals turned chaos into narrative. They made unbearable uncertainty bearable. But their legacy did not vanish. Even centuries later, echoes remain in how justice is imagined. The idea that suffering can reveal truth, that pain purifies, that endurance equals innocence. You see it in witch trials of the 17th century, in torture chambers where confessions were wrung from screams, even in modern jokes about trial by fire. The medieval ordeals left behind a template that spectacle can substitute for truth, that the crowd can be judge as much as the law. You hear it still, the hiss of iron, the splash of bodies, the clang of swords. They whisper across centuries that justice can be a mask worn to hide fear, power, and control. And so as the villagers disperse and the field lies empty under the fading sun, you turn toward the next chapter of medieval justice. If ordeal was the performance, executioners were its actors, the men who turned verdicts into flesh, who lived at the boundary between death and survival. Men both feared and needed, cursed and sought after. The road ahead reeks of blood and wood smoke. You follow it into the heart of the medieval city, where one man lives, both at the center of justice and on its very margins, the executioner. He is both necessary and despised, respected and cursed. To meet him is to confront the contradictions of medieval law itself. Picture him walking through the marketplace. The cobblestones are slick with spilled ale and refuse the smell of roasting meat mingling with that of sewage. People part nervously as he passes. Mothers whisper warnings to children. Don't let him touch you. For though his job sustains order, his very presence is thought to pollute. If his hand grazes a loaf, the bread is ruined. If his fingers brush an apple, no one will buy it. His touch is contamination. Yet when the city demands blood, all eyes turn to him. At dawn, he sharpens his sword or checks the noose, the iron rasp ringing like a grim hymn. His home lies beyond the town walls, forced into exile even within his own community. He is not permitted to live among clean people. At best, he rents a shabby cottage on the outskirts, the smell of tanneries and animal hides his closest neighbors. At worst, he lives by the gallows themselves, always in the shadow of death. But don't mistake him for a broken man. His work is steady, his pay decent, his tools valuable. He walks with the quiet authority of someone who knows the fear he inspires. To some, he is a monster. To others, he is insurance that order will be maintained. The paradox is clear. The executioner is both a pariah and a professional. Imagine the spectacle: a public square, a scaffold, a sea of faces craning upward. You stand in the throng, the smell of sweat and hot breath pressing in. The executioner mounts the platform. He pulls back his hood, revealing a scarred face hardened by years of this grim calling. He raises his axe or sword, the blade catching the sun, and the crowd falls silent. Then comes the thud, the spray of blood, the gasp of the audience. In that instant, he is the conductor of society's orchestra of fear. And when the crowd disperses, he vanishes back to his lonely house. Neighbors will not invite him to feast. Children will not play near his yard. He exists in perpetual exile, a man who belongs everywhere and nowhere, his identity defined by blood. Here's where it gets stranger. By noon, the same man who severed a head at sunrise may be mixing herbs to set a broken bone or stitching a wound. Yes, the executioner was often the town's healer. His expertise with anatomy, born of countless dissections on the scaffold, made him a surprisingly skilled surgeon. Imagine him in his cottage, the smell of boiled herbs filling the smoky air. A desperate villager hobbles in leg bent at an unnatural angle after falling from a cart. No one else will touch him, but the executioner will. His hands practiced with blades move with calm precision. He sets the bone splints, it wraps it with linen strips. The villager groans, then breathes easier. Outside neighbors pretend they disapprove, but when their children fall ill, they too come knocking. The irony is sharp. This man, unclean in markets, forbidden to touch bread, is allowed to touch your body, your blood, your pain. In fact, he is often the only one who can. Many executioners learned crude but effective surgery amputations, wound care bloodletting. Others worked as veterinarians, tending to horses and cattle. They lived at the intersection of medicine and mortality killers, by trade healers, by necessity. There are records of German executioners in the 16th century, famous for their remedies passing down medical knowledge from father to son. In some towns, people whispered that their potions were half science, half sorcery. But no one denied their effectiveness. The same blade that opened flesh in punishment also saved lives in quiet cottages. It's a paradox worth savoring. You picture him rinsing blood from his axe, then washing his hands to prepare a poultice. Death in the morning, healing in the afternoon. He lives as both executioner and physician, despised and sought after, feared and trusted. And as you consider this strange doubleness, you realize in medieval society, boundaries were not as rigid as we imagine. Life and death were neighbors, and the man who walked between them wore the title of outcast while holding the knowledge of both. The executioner was not the only profession caught between respect and revulsion. Across Europe, entire trades bore the same paradox. Take the gravedigger. By day, he dug deep pits in the churchyard, his spade striking bone as often as soil. The air around him always smelled of damp earth and decay. People avoided him, fearing the stench of death clung like a curse. Yet when plague swept through towns, when corpses piled in streets, his work became essential. Without him, disease would consume even more lives. Or consider the tanner whose livelihood came from soaking animal hides in vats of urine and quicklime. His yard reeked so badly that city councils ordered tanners to live on the outskirts far from polite society. Yet without him, there would be no leather for shoes, belts, or armor. Every knight owed his boots to the man everyone crossed the street to avoid. Even the gong farmer, the medieval cesspit cleaner, occupied this twilight space. Imagine wading waist-deep into human waste lantern and hand-scraping filth from privy pits. The stench was so strong it coated his hair and clothes, marking him as untouchable. But without him, medieval towns would choke on their own refuse. He carried the city's shame, hidden yet indispensable. You can almost smell it now, tanneries steaming, cesspits, bubbling graveyards yawning open. The medieval city was maintained by men and women exiled to the margins, despised for the very work that kept life functioning. And yet, like the executioner-physician, these professions developed their own strange forms of authority. A gravedigger knew the secrets of the dead. A tanner controlled materials vital for commerce. A gong farmer could ruin reputations with a whisper about what he found discarded in the filth. Power in the shadows, authority in disgust. That was the medieval way. As you leave this chapter, the paradox stays with you. Medieval society depended most on those it shunned, the killers who healed, the cleaners who saved cities, the outcasts who kept order alive. Their hands smelled of blood ash or waste, but without them there would have been no medieval world to survive at all. Stand still for a moment and look back at these people on the margins, the executioner with blood on his blade and herbs on his table, the gravedigger knee-deep in soil and bone, the tanner stirring foul hides in stinking vats, the gong farmer sinking into filth beneath the city. Each one exists at the border of disgust and necessity, and each one tells you something about how medieval society worked. These outcasts were not accidents. They were the deliberate creation of a culture that needed order, needed cleanliness, needed death, administered and buried, but also needed scapegoats. By branding entire professions as unclean, society reassured itself that contamination had boundaries. If you could point at the executioner and say he is polluted, then by contrast you could feel pure. If you could wrinkle your nose at the tanner, you could imagine yourself free of stench. Disgust became social glue, and yet disgust always carried fascination. Children peered at the gravedigger's spade with morbid awe. Housewives whispered about the gong farmer's nightly fines. Merchants cursed the executioner in daylight, then quietly sought his remedies at night. The outcast was a mirror showing people what they feared most. Death, decay, punishment. By shoving him to the edge, they thought they had banished these things. But they hadn't. They had simply embodied them in human form. You can almost hear it in the streets, the sudden hush, when the executioner passes the mocking songs aimed at tanners, the cruel jokes at gong farmers. All of it was ritualized, distant society's way of keeping dread at arm's length, but at the same time they were indispensable. Remove them and everything collapses, bodies rot in streets, leather runs out. Justice is toothless, cities drown in waste. The paradox is sharp as an axe blade. The more people spat on them, the more they were needed. And in that paradox lies the lesson. The medieval world was built not just by kings and knights, not only by monks and merchants, but also by those the community pretended not to see. Society was sustained by hands calloused from blood, dirt, dung, and ash. These hands rejected and cursed quietly built the conditions of survival. As you drift from this chapter, the smell of their work clings to you: smoke, leather, damp soil, human waste. And yet you understand without them, medieval life would have collapsed. Outcasts were not outsiders, they were the hidden spine of the age. And now, from the hidden workers at the margins, you step into another theater of medieval control, the laws of debt and humiliation. Here, justice did not just burn skin or split skulls, it stripped dignity in public squares. You leave behind the foul smoke of the executioner's cottage and the stench of the gong farmer's trade, stepping instead into the central square of a bustling medieval town. The air here is not cleaner. It reeks of stale beer, rotting vegetables, and the sweat of bodies pressed close, but it is louder. Bells clang, merchants shout, children dart between stalls, and the murmur of gossip ripples like a second wind through the streets. It is here in the very heart of community life that shame becomes law. A crier strikes his staff on the cobblestones. "Make way," he bellows. The crowd stirs eagerly. They know what's coming, a debtor's humiliation. And you find yourself pressed forward, shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, as the unfortunate victim is dragged into the open square. He is thin, hollow-eyed, perhaps a baker or a tailor who borrowed more coin than he could repay. His clothes are ripped away until he stands nearly naked, goose flesh rising on his arms in the morning chill. The crowd gasps, then titters. To be unclothed in public is not just exposure of the body, it is exposure of the soul. Every scar, every bruise, every shiver is on display. His shame is the performance, and the law demands he play it well. He is handed a bell and told to ring it with each cry, "I am a debtor, I cannot pay, I am disgraced." His voice cracks thin as parchment. Some laugh, others jeer. A woman hawks spit at his feet. Children throw pebbles. Yet the ritual is not purely cruelty. It has a purpose. The humiliation is designed to encourage charity. Neighbors may toss a coin or a crust of bread, softening his punishment with pity. The paradox is grotesque. The law strips him of dignity in order to restore it. He is shamed to be saved. The public square becomes courtroom and stage humiliation, the currency of justice. You can feel the emotions ripple through the crowd. Some cross themselves whispering prayers. Others lean in gleeful savoring another's downfall. It's a medieval version of reality TV, someone else's suffering laid bare for entertainment, with the moral veneer of law painted over it. The crier calls again. "Behold the wages of debt." The debtor's knees tremble. The cold wind bites his skin. The stones underfoot are sharp. The shame clings heavier than chains. And you realize this is punishment designed not to kill, but to linger. Death is quick. Shame lasts a lifetime. Tomorrow he will still walk these streets, and tomorrow the whispers will still follow him. What makes this most chilling is how effective it is. The threat of nakedness of ridicule keeps many from daring to default. Fear of the scaffold may deter crime, but fear of laughter and gossip, fear of being a walking punchline, shapes behavior even more deeply. A severed head is forgotten in days. A reputation ruined lasts generations. As you watch the man stumble away clutching the few coins tossed by sympathetic hands, you cannot help but compare it to modern life. Imagine your credit card debt displayed on a giant screen in the city center. Your bank balance announced over loudspeakers, your neighbors booing as you ring a bell. Medieval humiliation may look cruel, but perhaps it is only a crude mirror of the financial shame we still practice quietly today. The square clears, the buzz of gossip lingers, and you walk on. But the echo of the debtor's cries, thin, desperate ringing between stone walls, clings to you. The spectacle of humiliation might end in a single day, but the burden of debt often lasted far longer. In medieval Europe, debt was not just a matter of money. It was a stain, a curse that could leap from one generation to the next. Picture yourself in a cramped, timbered house, its walls smoky from a poorly vented hearth. A father lies dying on the straw mattress his children gathered around. He coughs, whispers a blessing, and then the bailiff knocks on the door. The man may be dead by sunset, but his debts are alive, passed to his sons and daughters like a poisoned inheritance. In some regions of Germany, the rule was clear. If a child was present when the debt was contracted, they could be held responsible years later. Imagine the absurdity: an 8-year-old sitting quietly in the corner, while her father borrows coin, unaware that her presence seals her fate. Decades later, a clerk might appear waving parchment declaring, "You were there when the debt was sworn. You must pay." The cruel brilliance of this system was its reach. Families lived in constant fear of financial snares. To protect children, some parents deliberately excluded them from important discussions, shooing them into the yard as though innocence could be purchased with ignorance. Children grew up learning quickly never be in the wrong room at the wrong time. Debts like ghosts haunted entire families. A son might inherit his father's land, but also his father's unpaid accounts. A daughter might marry only to find her dowry swallowed by creditors. Even a widow clutching rosary beads in the candlelit gloom might see her husband's debt collectors arrive before the grave dirt has dried. And yet debt was also strangely flexible. In some towns, the law allowed creative escape. A debtor might swear oaths of poverty claiming he owned nothing but the clothes on his back. Others fled across jurisdictions knowing that local customs varied wildly. Debt law was a patchwork quilt one town enforced with brutal zeal, another turned a blind eye. To cross a river or climb a hill could mean freedom or ruin. Still, for many, shame was the real prison. Public humiliation clung to families. Neighbors remembered who rang the debtor's bell, who stood naked in the square. Even children not legally responsible bore the whispers, the sideways glances. Medieval society was small, intimate, unforgiving. Reputation was currency, and once spent, it was rarely restored. And yet people found ways to laugh. Jesters mocked wealthy nobles who cried poverty. Tavern songs joked about men hiding from creditors in barrels or churches. There is dark humor in desperation, better naked in the square than naked in the grave. They said a grim consolation for those stripped by both poverty and law. You step back into the square in your mind's eye and you realize debt was never just numbers on parchment. It was social theater. It was memory. It was inheritance, shame, and fear woven together into the fabric of daily life. The crier's voice still echoes in your ears, "Behold the wages of debt," and you know the crowd will remember long after the debtor himself has slipped into the shadows. From here, the path of law twists once more. If debts and humiliation revealed the cruelty of poverty, the next stage reveals cruelty as entertainment. Beyond money and shame lies the brutal poetry of punishment in markets and streets. The bakers, the brewers, the cheats dragged before the public eye. The marketplace fills again with sound merchants hawking onions, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant toll of bells. Yet today the crowd does not come for goods. They come for spectacle. At the center of the square stands a wooden contraption, its beams polished by sweat and tears the pillory. You press closer, jostled by bodies, until you see the condemned. A man is forced forward, his head and hands shoved into wooden holes. The heavy boards clamp shut with a dull thud. The crowd cheers. He cannot move. His neck aches from the weight, his wrists burn from the pressure. Then comes the ritual cruelty. Children throw rotten vegetables saved for this very purpose. A butcher tosses scraps of offal. A woman spits with sharp precision. Some shout insults. Others laugh, all enjoying the rare privilege of mocking someone publicly trapped. The stench of cabbage, spoiled beer, and sweat fills the air. For hours, sometimes days, the man remains bound, sun beating down, flies buzzing mercilessly, throat parched with thirst. The purpose was not only punishment, but deterrence. The pillory shouted to everyone, "This is what happens when you cheat, when you lie, when you fail your duties." It was medieval advertising, the billboard of shame designed to burn an image into memory. And it worked. Long after the man is released, people will point, "There goes the one who stood in the stocks." His punishment lingers in whispers more permanent than bruises. Yet there is a darker undertone. Crowds sometimes grew violent. Stones replaced vegetables. Beatings left people broken. The line between lawful punishment and mob vengeance blurred quickly. The authorities knew this but tolerated it. The theater of shame was useful. It kept communities united in scorn. Fear bound people together more tightly than law. Standing in that square, you feel the oppressive heat. Hear the laughter, taste the dust stirred by hundreds of feet. You wonder how different is this from a modern tabloid headline, a viral video and online shaming. The pillory may be gone, but the human appetite for humiliation never died. Beyond the pillories and squares lay the deeper wound of debt, the slow erosion of honor. In the medieval world, reputation was not simply pride, it was survival. Credit, trust, and even marriage depended on the fragile currency of your name. Imagine a merchant accused of failing to repay a loan. His goods are seized, his stall emptied. But worse than loss of property is the loss of honor. He is forbidden from joining the guild, excluded from feasts, whispered about in taverns. His family feels the weight too. His wife hears the gossip at the well. His children are mocked in the schoolyard. Honor once cracked rarely heals. Debt was a stain more enduring than a scar. Legal codes in France and Italy often declared that dishonor was as severe a punishment as physical pain. Some cities even displayed debtor lists on church doors, names written for all to see, a medieval blacklist. You can picture the shamed neighbors scanning the parchment lips curling at familiar names. Ah, so he owes the baker. Figures. Yet dishonor was not always permanent. Some clawed back their reputations through extraordinary acts, military service, generous donations, even pilgrimages. A man might walk barefoot for hundreds of miles to a holy shrine begging for redemption, hoping God's favor would erase worldly shame. Others relied on sheer spectacle, publicly repaying debts with dramatic flair, tossing coins into the air as crowds gasped. Redemption was possible, but only with ritual sacrifice or spectacle as grand as the humiliation itself. What fascinates you most is the psychology. Medieval people lived under constant surveillance, not by cameras, but by neighbors. Every alley, every market, every pew in church was a sign. One wrong move, one unpaid bill, and you risked eternal gossip. Imagine trying to sleep at night hearing the whispers of tomorrow's market before they even began. And so the fear of dishonor kept people obedient. It was not gallows or flames that bound society most tightly, but the invisible chains of reputation. Break those and you were exiled without leaving town. You might live under the same roof, walk the same streets, but you no longer belonged. The medieval law of debt, then, was not merely financial. It was theatrical, psychological, and spiritual. It stripped away clothing, locked bodies in wood, smeared names with ink, and scarred reputations forever. It was punishment that lived on long after the cries had faded and the pillories were empty. As the crowd in the square disperses, you feel the lingering echo of shame clinging like smoke. You can almost hear the mutters, "There goes the debtor." And you realize that in a world without credit scores or courts of appeal, gossip was the highest court of all. You step away, the sound of bells fading, the memory of humiliation etched into your mind. But the marketplace holds more than shame. Beyond debt and disgrace lies another stage of justice, the regulation of bread, ale, and meat. Here, survival itself was bound by law, and cheating could mean starvation. The theater of humiliation shifts now from debtors to bakers, brewers, and butchers. The crowd in the marketplace drifts away, their laughter fading into whispers. Yet the square does not grow quiet. It is the beating heart of medieval life, where gossip mixes with the smell of bread, where justice mingles with trade, where survival itself is sold by the loaf and the pint. Debt may have shamed the poor and ruined reputations, but food was the true measure of life. And so the law reached into ovens and alehouses, weighing loaves, sniffing barrels, judging butchers and brewers with as much zeal as any courtroom. If a debtor's disgrace made the crowd jeer, a baker's fraud could make them riot. You step forward past the pillory and the shame bell into the world of medieval food laws, where bread could condemn, ale could betray, and markets themselves were a theater of survival. The smell of fresh bread drifts through the narrow lanes, warm and yeasty, carried on the chill morning air. You follow it to the baker's stall, where round loaves sit stacked in neat rows, crusts golden and cracked. But here in the medieval city, bread is not just food, it is law, justice, and danger all at once. Bread was the foundation of survival. For most peasants and townsfolk, it made up more than half of the daily diet. Wheat bread for the rich, rye and barley for the poor, oatcakes in the leanest years. But because bread was life, bread was regulated with ferocity. The Assize of Bread in England, first issued in 1266, dictated the weight of loaves according to the price of grain. Every ounce was measured, every crumb accounted for. You watch as officials stride into the market, their scales gleaming, their faces stern. They seize a loaf, weighs it, frown. If the bread is too light, the punishment is swift. Sometimes the baker is fined. Sometimes his loaves are burned before the crowd's smoke rising like a warning. In harsher cases, the baker himself is pilloried, forced to stand, while townsfolk pelt him with stale crusts and jeers. The rules are strict because hunger is dangerous. In years of bad harvest, when grain runs short, bread riots can erupt. A single rumor of cheating bakers is enough to spark chaos. Picture the square filled not with jeers but with fists, a mob overturning carts, smashing ovens, demanding justice with shouts and stones. Authorities know this well. Controlling bread means controlling peace. But bakers, like all humans, were cunning. Some mixed sawdust or chalk into dough, stretching precious flour further. Others carved away at loaf size, hiding the theft beneath thick crust. You imagine biting into such bread, the taste of grit on your tongue, the unpleasant crunch of something that is not grain. Fraudulent bread was more than betrayal. It was insult, disease, even death. And so the baker lived in constant fear. Every loaf was both sustenance and potential crime. His livelihood depended not only on ovens and flour, but on the judgment of the market. If he failed, humiliation, or worse, awaited. His apron dusted with flour, his face slick with sweat, he baked under the weight of law itself. As you chew the warm crust in your imagination, you realize that bread in medieval Europe was more than food. It was survival, law, morality, and trust all bound together. And breaking that trust meant punishment as fierce as any sword. From the baker's stalls, you drift toward the taverns where the scent of malt and hops mingles with wood smoke. A barmaid sweeps the threshold, her hands red from scrubbing, while inside the barrels sit heavy in the gloom, their staves damp and swollen. Ale is the lifeblood of medieval towns, not only a drink, but safer than water, thick with calories and consumed from dawn to dusk. But just as with bread, the law hovered over every barrel. In England, ale-conners patrolled markets, dipping leather breeches into the froth of fresh brew, sitting on the soaked fabric to test stickiness. A sticky seat meant strong ale. Too weak or watered down, and the brewer faced fines or humiliation. In some towns, alehouses displayed official seals proving their barrels had been tested. Without it, suspicion brewed as fast as yeast. You picture the scene: an ale-conner waddling through the market in his dampened trousers, the crowd laughing, the brewer sweating bullets. It sounds absurd, but to medieval people it was deadly serious. Bad ale wasn't just disappointment, it was betrayal. A weak brew cheated workers of energy, risked illness, and undermined trust. Brewers, like bakers, often faced pillories. A woman accused of short measure might be dragged by her hair, forced to sit astride a cucking stool, dunked repeatedly into filthy water while the crowd roared. Her ale became a joke, her name a warning. Others were ordered to drink their own sour brew in public, gagging before jeering neighbors. Yet ale was too important to vanish. Even monasteries brewed barrels daily, their cloisters filled with the warm, sweet smell of fermenting grain. Pilgrims drank from wooden mugs at roadside inns. Knights swilled before battle peasants shared jugs after long days in the field. To cheat in ale was to cheat the whole community. You take an imaginary sip, bitter, thick, slightly sour. It fills the stomach, dulls the thirst, numbs the edges of hardship. No wonder the authorities watched barrels like hawks. A bad loaf might starve a family. A bad barrel might poison a village. And so law once again seeped into daily life through food and drink. As the tavern empties at dusk, the streets echo with drunken songs. The smell of bread and ale lingers together, heavy and sour-sweet. A reminder that medieval justice lived not only in gallows or pillories, but in every crumb and every sip. The tavern air still clings to you, warm ale on the tongue, the sound of laughter echoing in your ears. But now another smell rises, sharp and metallic blood. You follow it into the butcher's quarter, where slabs of meat hang from hooks, glistening in the morning light. Flies swarm lazily. The cobbles underfoot are slick with fat, and gore slippery enough to make you stumble if you're not careful. Here, law and hunger collide in raw form. Meat was precious, scarce for peasants, but a staple for the wealthy. Every cut mattered, and so every butcher stood under suspicion. Officials inspected their stalls, sniffing for rot, checking weights. A butcher who sold spoiled flesh risked not just fines, but public disgrace. Some were ordered to parade their tainted meat through the streets before it was burned, the smoke mingling with curses. Others were forced to eat their own rotten wares, gagging before a jeering mob. You watch one man at his stall knife flashing. His apron is soaked, his arms strong from years of carving. Yet his eyes flick nervously toward the market guards. He knows one slip, one accusation could end his trade. Meat was dangerous business. A carcass left too long turned fast-spreading sickness. A dishonest cut cheated customers and stirred fury. And in a time when famine was always one harvest away, fury was never far from the surface. The theater of punishment was vivid. Butchers caught cheating were sometimes tied to their own stalls. Carcasses hung around their necks like grotesque collars. In France, there are records of men marched through town with rancid beef dangling from their shoulders, stinking for all to see. Imagine the humiliation, the laughter, the flies, the stink sticking to skin. It wasn't just punishment, it was performance. And yet, like bakers and brewers, butchers were indispensable. Their knives fed the city. Without them, feast days starved and festivals failed. People loathed them, feared their dishonesty, but crowded their stalls all the same. It was another paradox. Society despised those it needed most. You take in the scene, the clamor of cleavers, the stench of entrails, the glisten of fat. It is a world of appetite and anxiety where survival balances on the blade of a knife. From butcher stalls, you wander deeper into the market where the shouts grow louder, the smells stronger. Fishmongers hawk their catch scales glittering in the weak sunlight, while cheese sellers arrange rounds already sweating in the heat. Everywhere, suspicion simmers. For food was life and fraud was a crime against survival itself. Imagine biting into bread laced with chalk, swallowing ale watered with ditch water, chewing meat green with rot. These were not accidents, they were acts of desperation or greed. And they carried consequences. In some towns, dishonest traders were strapped to carts and paraded through the streets, their fraudulent goods dangling as evidence. Others faced the pillory with fish guts or spoiled cheese smeared across their faces by gleeful neighbors. But the most dangerous punishment came not from the law, but from the mob. Food riots were a medieval constant. One rumor of hoarded grain or falsified weights could spark chaos. Crowds surged, overturning carts, looting bakeries, smashing barrels. Authorities feared these riots more than most crimes, for hunger was a sharper sword than any knight's blade. You can almost hear it. The roar of a crowd, the crack of wood as stalls are broken, the shrieks of merchants fleeing. The air thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, the taste of panic rising like bile. In these moments, justice was not handed down from above. It boiled up from below, wild and furious. And famine amplified it all. In years of bad harvest, food fraud became treason. A baker shaving ounces from loaves risked not just ridicule, but death at the hands of a desperate mob. A butcher who sold spoiled meat might be lynched before guards could intervene. When bellies were empty, patience disappeared. The law tried to keep pace. Inspectors prowled market scales in hand, sniffing, prodding, judging. Some cities codified punishments into elaborate rituals, bakers forced to carry loaves through streets. Brewers dunked in barrels of sour ale. Fishmongers whipped with their own nets. The message was always the same: food was sacred, and betrayal of trust was betrayal of life itself. But beneath the spectacle lay fear. Hunger was the great leveler. It did not care if you were noble or peasant. When bread vanished, so did order. And so the law's obsession with food was not petty, it was survival strategy. To control markets was to control society. As twilight falls, you walk the market one last time. The stalls are nearly empty, scraps of meat drying in the air, crumbs of bread scattered by pigeons. The square smells of smoke, stale ale, and sweat, but it hums with memory, the cries of fraud, the laughter of punishment, the roar of riots. And you realize that in this world, food was never just food. It was law, life, and power, balanced precariously between famine and feast. The marketplace behind you fades into quiet and night draws down across the town. Yet somewhere beyond the walls of cottages, fires still roar in cavernous kitchens. You can smell it before you see it. The heavy perfume of roasting meat, the sharp sweetness of cinnamon, the bitter tang of cloves, saffron staining pots, gold. Inside the great halls of lords and bishops, feasts are beginning. The tables gleam with polished pewter torches, crackle in iron sconces, and shadows leap along the timbered roof. Platters arrive in procession, whole boars stuffed with apples, swans, refeathered and gilded peacocks roasted but restored to their dazzling plumage eyes. Glassy bodies, shimmering like trophies. The smell is intoxicating, almost overwhelming, heavy enough to coat your throat. Each dish is less about nourishment than spectacle. Nobles eat to prove their wealth, each bite declaring, "I can afford this world's luxuries." You can almost taste the richness, fat dripping down your chin. Meat salted heavily, sauces sharp with imported spice. For a moment, the banquet feels endless. Yet beneath the laughter and music lies a shadow. Too much of this excess led to gout-swollen limbs, aching bellies that left men hobbling in velvet shoes. Indulgence was a sickness as much as hunger. Step outside the hall in your mind and the smells change instantly. The air is colder, filled with smoke from cottage hearths. Sharp cabbage boiling in thin broth, the sour tang of rye bread baking on hot stones. In a peasant hut supper is poor, dark bread, dense as stone, a bowl of pottage flavored with Whatever root or herb could be found, sometimes stretched with acorn flour. A child chews slowly while parents glance anxiously at the dwindling sack of grain. The contrast stings. Inside stone walls, nobles chew roasted venison and wipe grease with linen. Outside, peasants gnaw coarse crusts and pray for another good harvest. Both eat, yet both suffer, one from too much, the other from too little. The divide is so clear you can almost draw it in the air, a line carved by spice and scarcity alike. Beyond daily meals lay the politics of food itself. Bread and wine were not just staples, but symbols of status. White bread, fine and soft, was a mark of wealth. Black rye bread, a badge of poverty. To drink spiced wine meant you had connections stretching to distant lands, trade routes, guarded by merchants and armies. To drink weak ale meant you belonged at the bottom. Every meal became a declaration of rank, a quiet affirmation of where you stood in the hierarchy. Festivals blurred these lines for brief, shimmering moments. At fairs, peasants might taste sugar or honeyed cakes, their eyes widening at sweetness rarely theirs to claim. On feast days, lords might host entire villages, barrels of ale, rolled out oxen, slaughtered fires roaring. For a night, divisions softened in shared laughter and communal music. But when dawn came, the divide returned sharper than before. Food was theater, and everyone played a role. At noble tables, dishes arrived in elaborate order fish. First, then roasted meats, then sweetmeats, each course a performance of abundance. Guests marveled at pies filled with live birds that burst forth in fluttering surprise. At peasant tables, the performance was silence eating, in weary stillness bowls, shared nothing wasted, each bite measured. The irony was bitter. Nobles consumed spices that traveled thousands of miles, traded through deserts and across seas, brought at immense cost. Yet they scarcely knew hunger. Peasants consumed what grew in fields they worked themselves. Their bodies bent in labor, their bellies often half full. They knew hunger intimately, and it shaped every decision, every prayer, every whisper of survival. And yet sometimes life mocked the divide. During famine, even nobles tightened belts, their kitchens echoing with absence, the smell of spice jars, a cruel reminder of vanished abundance. Meanwhile, peasants turned to survival tricks, bark, mixed with flower weeds, boiled into stew grass, chewed when nothing else remained. Hunger was the true lord of the land, and no wall or banquet hall could keep it out forever. When you close your eyes, you hear both tables at once, the clatter of knives on pewter plates, the murmur of grace over dark bread, laughter over golden goblets, the soft hiss of cabbage in peasant pots. The sounds mingle, contradictory yet harmonious, telling the same story in two keys. To eat was to live, but how you ate declared who you were. The hall of feasting fades, but the echo of laughter lingers. You drift into the kitchens, the hidden engine of abundance. Here the air is thick with smoke, the heat so heavy you can barely breathe. Boys turn spits with aching arms, geese crackle above flames. Cauldrons bubble with stews rich enough to perfume the entire courtyard. The noise is endless, cleavers, chopping dogs barking for scraps, cooks shouting as they hurl insults and ladles in equal measure. Yet not all kitchens belong to lords. In most cottages, cooking meant a single iron pot hanging over a smoky fire. There was no sequence of courses, no sugared peacock to impress guests. Supper was boiled pottage ladled into wooden bowls shared in silence. The contrast between the roar of the manor kitchen and the hush of the peasant hearth could not be sharper. And still both spaces were tied together by the same hierarchy. In the manor, servants tasted dishes before they reached the lord's lips, not to savor, but to prove they weren't poisoned. In cottages, mothers tasted broth before handing the spoon to children, praying it wasn't too thin to fill them. Two worlds apart, yet joined by fear, one of betrayal, the other of scarcity. Food in noble kitchens was also a tool of politics. To be invited to dine was to be honored. To be denied a seat was insult. Banquets were stages where alliances were forged, marriages arranged, debts cemented. You can almost hear the whispered negotiations carried between gulps of wine and bites of venison. Even the placement of guests mattered. Near the lord you basked in favor. Near the door you were forgotten. Meanwhile, in village homes, food reinforced smaller bonds. Sharing bread with a neighbor could mean survival through winter. Lending a sack of grain was both risk and lifeline. Meals were not grand theater, but survival packs, threads in the fragile web of community. Imagine the smells, saffron and roasted boar, drifting from high windows, mingling with the smoke of cabbage stews leaking from thatched roofs. The entire medieval landscape smelled of food hunger and the constant reminder of division. And yet in both kitchens there was laughter. In the manor, servants joked as they burned a roast, the clamor of pots hiding their giggles. In cottages, children laughed at a splattered spoon, joy flickering like sparks. Food did not erase hardship, but it stitched moments of warmth into cold days. Step now into the dining rituals themselves. At a noble table, eating was performance, a symphony of gestures. Servants bowed low, pouring wine into goblets so polished they caught the firelight. The Lord carved meat with deliberate grace, passing slices to favored guests. Each course arrived with ceremony: roasted fowl, spiced pies, sugared fruits arranged like jewels. The clink of knives and laughter echoed beneath painted ceilings, the entire hall pulsing with wealth. But beneath the elegance lay strict rules. Guests washed hands before meals, sometimes in basins of rosewater, and wiped mouths with linen cloths. To reach too quickly for food was shameful. To spill wine was clumsy. Every gesture was judged, every bite a performance of refinement. You eat not only to fill your stomach, but to declare your civility. In cottages, the rituals were just as strict, though far humbler. The father often ate first, dipping bread into pottage while children waited. The mother distributed food according to hunger, age, or sheer fairness. To take too much was greed. To leave scraps was insult. Wooden bowls clattered spoons, scraped, and silence was the usual grace. Religion wound itself into every meal. On fast days, meat vanished from noble halls and peasant huts alike. Fish took its place, salted, smoked, or boiled. The smell sharp enough to linger in your clothes. During Lent, entire villages turned their diets upside down, learning once again the edge between indulgence and restraint. The church made sure that even hunger had hierarchy, rules, and ritual. And yet, for all the solemnity, meals could spiral into chaos. Banquets stretched late into the night, goblets refilled until speech slurred and arguments erupted. In some chronicles, knights toppled from benches drunk and laughing, meat still clutched in greasy hands. At peasant weddings, ale flowed until songs drowned. Reasoned neighbors danced barefoot in the mud, laughter louder than hunger. Meals, whether rich or poor, were never only about sustenance. They were about belonging. To eat at the table was to be part of the community. To be excluded, to fast alone, to eat scraps in the shadows, was exile. Food was a passport, a declaration of who mattered and who did not. You feel it now. The clatter of pewter, the scrape of spoons, the chant of prayers before eating. From gilded halls to smoky huts, meals echoed the same truth. To eat was to survive, but also to be seen. Hunger gnawed fullness, bloated, yet reputation was always on the plate. And as the night darkens, the smell of kitchens fading into the damp air, you sense the story turning again. Beyond hunger and feasting lay another realm of medieval existence, the body's constant battle with filth, illness, and the strange remedies people trusted to keep them alive. The smell of roasted meats fades, leaving behind only a greasy memory on your lips. But what lingers most is not taste, it is hierarchy. Every meal, every crumb reinforced the lines that separated rich from poor, noble from peasant. Even hunger itself was distributed by rank. In villages, famine bit hardest at the bottom. When harvest failed, the Lord still claimed his tithe. Priests still collected their due, and soldiers still seized supplies for war. The peasants left with scraps resorted to desperate measures. Bread stretched with sawdust, soups brewed with weeds, bark ground into powder to mimic flour. Imagine chewing bread so bitter it puckers your tongue, its grit grinding against your teeth. Children whimpered with bellies swollen from emptiness while their parents chewed slowly, pretending not to be hungry. Meanwhile, in manors, famine was softened, but never absent. Nobles might tighten belts, sell jewelry to buy grain, or slaughter livestock early. Yet even in hardship, their tables bore more than peasants could dream. A rabbit pie instead of venison, watered wine instead of spice, still marked them as safe from starvation. They might complain of hunger, but their definition was far removed from the peasant crouched over acorn bread. The divide reached beyond food into the very etiquette of eating. Nobles dined on plates, peasants from communal bowls. Nobles drank from goblets, peasants from wooden mugs or their cupped hands. To share bread with the Lord was a privilege. To beg for crumbs was humiliation. Each gesture reminded everyone of their place. Yet famine was a leveler in its own cruel way. When grain stores emptied entirely, riots shook towns. Crowds stormed bakeries, overturned markets, tore open barns. Even noble households feared the mob for hunger, made peasants reckless. In such moments, the gulf between classes shrank not because it vanished, but because desperation bound everyone in the same fragile chain. Hunger respected no velvet or crown. Picture the sound of a hungry village, the thin cries of children, the grinding of millstones turning empty, the eerie silence of fields barren and bare. Then picture the hollow laughter of nobles forcing merriment. At smaller feasts, goblets raised, half-full servants hiding worry in the corners. Two soundscapes, one truth: survival was fragile, and food was the measure of power. As the medieval world revolved around bread and ale, spices became the glittering thread that stitched global trade into daily life. For the peasant, spices were rumor flavors whispered about, but rarely tasted. For the noble, spices were wealth incarnate, each grain of pepper worth its weight in silver, each pinch of saffron a mark of power. Imagine standing in a noble kitchen, the air thick with scents you scarcely recognize: cinnamon, sweet and sharp; cloves pungent enough to sting your nose; nutmeg, warm as firewood; ginger bright and biting. These were not local gifts. They had traveled across deserts and seas, carried by caravans and ships passing through hands that taxed them at every port. By the time they reached Europe, they gleamed like treasure. Spices transformed meals into performances. Venison stewed with cloves. Wine spiced with cinnamon sauces, tinted golden with saffron. To serve a spiced dish was not about flavor alone. It was a declaration: I command wealth vast enough to reach the ends of the earth. Guests tasted not only food, but status itself. Meanwhile, peasants flavored pottage with onions or leeks, sometimes a sprig of parsley, maybe mustard seeds grown in village plots. Their tongues knew earth bitterness, smoke, but rarely the fireworks of distant trade. For them, spices were myths wrapped in fragrance. The irony was sharp spices prized as luxuries often masked spoiled meat. In a time without refrigeration, venison might turn quickly fish sour overnight. A heavy hand of pepper or clove disguised the rot. Nobles laughed over delicacies, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, that their gold had purchased perfume for decay. Beyond taste, spices drove history itself. Ships launched wars, waged routs, carved across oceans, all to bring the noble table its glitter of flavor. You taste the irony: peasants broke teeth on black bread while kings gambled empires for pepper. And yet both rich and poor shared one truth. Food shaped not just the body, but the story of their lives. To eat simply was survival. To eat richly was power. Hunger gnawed, spice dazzled, but both fed the same fragile human frame. You walk now through the echo of feasts and famines. The perfume of saffron fading. The smoke of cabbage stews thinning in the air. Ahead lies a darker path. Beyond food and status, another force ruled medieval life: the constant presence of illness, filth, and the desperate rituals people trusted to survive. The saffron and roasted meats fade, leaving only the heaviness in your gut and the sour aftertaste of ale. You lie on your straw mattress, the rough stalks poking through the thin linen, and before you can even rise, the itching begins. Fleas leap, lice crawl, bedbugs nip at your ankles. The smell of your bedding is a mixture of damp straw and the unmistakable musk of animals it once served as fodder in a stable before becoming your bed. You scratch until your skin stings, but it makes no difference. Vermin are everywhere. They live in your hair, burrow in your clothes, and cling to your children as tightly as shadows. Nobles scratch too, hidden beneath their velvet. A queen might sit in a chamber lined with tapestries worth more than a village, yet she digs her nails at her scalp with the same weary futility as a peasant in a smoky hut. Vermin are democracy in its truest medieval form. Step outside and the assault continues. The street greets you with a stench so thick you could chew it. Rotting fish dumped by the butcher chamber pots hurled from windows, dung from horses steaming in the mud. When it rains, all of it churns into a foul soup, the cobbles slick and brown. Children splash through it with bare feet, laughter ringing, while mothers mutter about fevers sure to follow. Disease is constant. You hear a cough in one cottage, wet rattling deep in the chest. In another, a child whimpers with fever, cheeks flushed, lips cracked. Dysentery sweeps through villages when wells are fouled. Its stench unmistakable, its grip merciless. Malaria haunts marshy regions, the buzzing of mosquitoes heralding sweats and chills that leave bodies trembling. Tuberculosis lingers like a ghost in households, its victims coughing blood for years before fading. Superstition offers explanations. Neighbors whisper that a fever comes from an evil eye, that wasting sickness is punishment for pride. Some mutter about witches, others about demons lurking in the night air. Without microscopes or germ theory, every cough and rash becomes mystery, every illness a riddle posed by God. And still life goes on. Children chase each other through alleys, scratching as they run. Merchants haggle over onions with handkerchiefs pressed to their runny noses. Priests ring bells to drive away plague, their solemn chants mixing with the drone of flies. The body is always under siege, yet the will to endure is relentless. Imagine the weight of exhaustion, the smoky air in your hut burning your throat, your belly tight with hunger, your skin crawling with vermin, and still you rise to till the fields. Death is near, but so is life, stubborn and clinging. The battlefield is your flesh, and every day you fight again. If the body is always besieged, the mind seeks defenses. And so the medieval world overflows with remedies, some wise, some desperate, many absurd. Step into a smoky cottage, and you find a mother boiling onions and garlic, the air stinging your eyes. She presses the hot cloth against her child's chest, murmuring that the vapors will chase away fever. The child coughs, splutters, then drifts into uneasy sleep. Across town, a barber surgeon opens a vein in a man's arm, dark blood dripping steadily into a wooden bowl. The theory is humor's balance must be restored. Blood phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. If you have too much of one, you must bleed or purge. You feel faint just watching. Other cures are stranger. Physicians prescribe crushed emeralds in wine, believing jewels carry divine healing. Some mix powdered bones of saints into potions. Others smear dung goat dog, even human, onto wounds, convinced its heat will draw out infection. You want to gag, but the desperate cling to any promise. Monasteries preserve knowledge in ink and vellum. You wander into a scriptorium and smell parchment and herbs. Monks copy recipes from the Trotula guides on women's health, or the writings of Hildegard of Bingen, who recommends fennel for digestion, hyssop for cough, and music for the soul. These remedies blend faith and observation, half science, half prayer. Yet belief outweighs all. A pilgrim limps to a shrine, pressing his boils against a relic. A woman swallows a scrap of parchment inscribed with holy words. A knight ties a charm of wolf teeth around his neck before battle. The lines between doctor and priest blur, between healing and ritual vanish. The cures often hurt more than they helped. Mercury ointments poisoned as much as they soothed. Bleeding weakened the already weak. Drinking ground gemstones only lined the coffers of quacks. But to medieval minds, suffering itself was part of the cure. If a remedy burned, stung, or made you retch, it must be working. Pain was evidence of progress. You picture the scene vividly, the acrid smoke of burning juniper in a plague-stricken town. The bitter taste of vinegar gargled for sore throats. The thick iron tang of blood as leeches writhe on pale skin. In these moments, medicine is as much ritual as treatment, a fragile hope against relentless decay. And still amidst the folly, there are glimmers of truth. Honey cleans wounds, garlic fights infection. Herbs ease pain. Experience slowly teaches wisdom, even if wrapped in superstition. You realize medicine is a long, stumbling journey, and these fumbling hands are the ancestors of modern healers. For now, though, you shiver in the smoky cottage, the air thick with herbs and incense, the sound of coughs echoing from the street. Remedies are everywhere, but certainty is nowhere. The body remains fragile, faith remains strong, and survival depends on both. You step into the heart of the town again, and the reality of public life hits you like a slap. The streets are narrow, pressed between leaning houses that drip chamber pots from their windows. At dawn, you hear the splash someone tossing last night's waste into the gutter. The air curdles with the sour stink of urine and rot layered atop the smoke of cook fires. You lift your hem, but it's no use. Your boots sink into muck, a blend of rain dung and whatever unlucky refuse has landed there overnight. Civic leaders try to impose order. Town ordinances declare that butchers must dump blood outside the walls, that tanners must keep their foul pits far from the market, that gong farmers, those miserable cleaners of privies, must empty cesspits under moonlight. And yet rules are broken as quickly as they are written. A butcher is caught rinsing entrails in the public well. A tanner's stink drifts into the high street. A cesspit overflows, seeping into a neighbor's cellar. The laws are more hope than reality. Disease thrives in this chaos. Dysentery flares in summer heat spread by fouled water. Smallpox sweeps through crowded alleys, its rash blooming on children's skin like fire. Leprosy stalks the edges of society, its sufferers banished to isolated colonies, their bells ringing as they beg for alms. The town fears them, yet can never quite cast them out. They are living reminders that sin and sickness walk hand in hand. And yet, even in filth, there are flickers of resistance. Cities hire rakers to sweep streets, water sellers to haul barrels from rivers, even inspectors to sniff out bad meat and sour ale. Their work is constant, thankless and doomed to imperfection, but it keeps collapse at bay. You hear the scrape of rakes on cobblestone smell lime, sprinkled over refuse sea carts hauling away steaming piles of dung. It is never enough, but it is something. For ordinary people, coping becomes second nature. You hold a sprig of rosemary to your nose against the stench, tie charms to your door against sickness. Pray each night the air itself doesn't betray you. The word miasma, bad air, becomes a curse whispered as fever takes another neighbor. To breathe is to gamble, and still life goes on. Merchants spread cloth on stalls, children run barefoot. Bells call the faithful to church. Filth is normal, invisible accepted. To live here is to walk constantly in a fog of waste and risk shrugging at what cannot be changed. You almost stop noticing the smell almost. Amid all the muck, you might think people abandoned cleanliness entirely. Yet bathhouses rise in towns like strange oases, domed and steamy, their air thick with the mingled scents of hot water, soapwort, and human sweat. Step inside and you hear the murmur of voices, the splash of water, the hiss of steam rising from stone tubs. For peasants, bathing is rare, maybe once a year in rivers or wooden tubs dragged into cottages. The water quickly turns brown, the soap harsh and homemade, the experience less luxury than necessity. But in towns, bathhouses serve a different purpose. They are social spaces, places of gossip, negotiation, and sometimes sin. Candles flicker on wet walls, men and women mingle, laughter rising with the steam. Priests thunder against them, calling them dens of immorality, yet the doors never stay shut. The wealthy have private tubs carved of stone filled with scented water warmed by servants. Imagine sitting in such a bath, rosemary floating on the surface, linen towels warming by the fire. It feels clean, decadent, safe, though the lice return as soon as you dress again. Cleanliness is always relative. To rub scented oils on your body counts as washing. To change your linen shirt is as good as a bath. Nobles perfume their hair, peasants scrub hands with sand. Everyone pretends the smell is gone, though your nose insists otherwise. Superstition complicates matters. Some fear too much. Bathing opens the pores, letting sickness seep in. A single bath may be followed by months of avoidance. Others wash obsessively before holy days, believing purity of body ensures purity of soul. Cleanliness is measured not in germs, but in sin. The irony? Many remedies meant to cleanse made people sicker. Bathhouse water used by dozens in a single day carried disease. Scented oils masked infection but did not cure it. Even the belief in bad air meant people closed shutters, sealing sickness inside with them. The cure became the cage. Yet for all the futility, the ritual of bathing endures. You imagine yourself in a dim bathhouse, steam curling around you, the sound of voices rising and echoing the smell of herbs mixing with sweat. For a brief moment you feel relief, the illusion of health, the illusion of safety. When you step outside again, the night air bites your damp skin, and the streets remind you of reality. The filth is still there, the sickness still waiting, the remedies still uncertain. Cleanliness is not truth, but hope, a fragile defense against forces no one fully understands. And as you walk away, you realize the medieval world was never just hungry or filthy. It was fragile in every sense, its people clinging to survival with stubbornness and ritual. The story flows now toward the darkest shadows of all the moments when disease did not just whisper, but roared, reshaping history with plagues that silenced towns and left graveyards yawning open. The everyday filth, the coughs in cottages, the fevers that pass from neighbor to neighbor. These are constant companions. But sometimes sickness does not whisper. It roars. It sweeps into towns with a speed and ferocity that turns every alley into a graveyard. The Black Death is remembered like a scar carved into the skin of Europe. Picture it a summer's day, the market bustling, bread warm on stalls, ale foaming in mugs, and then suddenly a man collapses. His skin blooms with black swellings, buboes at his groin and armpits. Fever burns so hot his lips crack. Within days, his body lies stiff and his family coughs the same death rattle. The stench of decay mixes with the stink of the city, overpowering even the strongest spice. You hear it in the bells. Churches toll endlessly, the sound of mourning, drowning laughter. Streets once crowded with merchants grow silent, broken only by the rumble of death carts and the wails of widows. Graves are dug hastily, one atop another, the earth unable to swallow fast enough. Priests stumble through prayers until their own voices fail with fever. Superstition seizes the air. Some blame foul air burning herbs in the streets to drive away invisible poisons. Others blame sin whipping their backs in bloody processions, believing pain might turn God's wrath aside. Whispers spread that Jews poisoned wells, leading to massacres born of fear. Hope and cruelty dance together, each feeding the other. The plague reshapes everything. Work ceases, markets collapse, villages vanish. But in the aftermath, strange opportunities appear. Survivors find themselves with more land, more wages, more bargaining power. The plague kills, but it also transforms. It is death and change bound together. Imagine walking a deserted street. The silence heavy, the smell of lime scattered over corpses sharp in your nose. You step lightly, afraid of both the dead and the living, knowing disease lingers in every breath. This is not just illness, it is apocalypse lived in slow motion. Even centuries later, the memory remains. Any fever, any rash sparks. Fear, is it back? Parents hush children. Neighbors glance warily, the memory of mass graves whispering across generations. Death becomes a neighbor you cannot forget. When plague or pestilence strikes, the sickness is not just in the body. It seeps into the mind, into the fragile bonds of community. Fear spreads faster than fever, reshaping how people live together or apart. You hear it in the sudden silence of doors barred at night. Families hide behind shutters, refusing to help neighbors, even when cries echo in the dark. Wells are avoided, markets deserted. The smell of smoke fills streets as people burn herbs rags, even entire homes, in desperate rituals of cleansing. Hope is measured in smoke, fear in silence. But faith rushes in to fill the void. Churches overflow with processions of the desperate candles dripping wax like tears onto stone floors. Priests raise relics high, their voices hoarse with constant prayers. Pilgrims stagger toward shrines, believing each step might erase the shadow at their backs. And yet faith cuts both ways. Some accuse witches of summoning illness, neighbors of harboring demons, foreigners of bringing poison. The sick are sometimes abandoned, sometimes blamed, sometimes killed outright in terror's name. In villages, gossip becomes law. If your cough lingers too long, if your skin looks pale, suspicion grows. Mothers pull children away from your touch. Friends cross the street. Illness is exile, and exile is another form of death. Yet strangely, these moments also bind survivors together. When the fever passes, when the dead are buried, those who remain share an intimacy no banquet could match. They whisper their losses, mourn together, rebuild fields and walls side by side. The memory of fear carves bonds as deep as wounds. You can almost smell it. The acrid tang of burning herbs, the salt of tears, the faint sweetness of incense rising in crowded chapels. You can hear it too, coughing in darkened rooms, bells tolling for the dead, the chant of prayers rising and falling like waves. Fear becomes part of the rhythm of life, as constant as hunger, as enduring as faith. And in the end, what remains is resilience. Despite death's constant presence, people endure. They laugh, they pray, till the earth they raise children. Fragile, filthy, sick, but stubbornly alive. The smoke of burning herbs drifts behind you as you leave this chapter. Ahead lies another domain of medieval existence, not in sickness, but in belief. For beyond food, filth, and death, life was shaped by rituals of the spirit, the bells of churches, the chants of monks, the faith that bound every day. The last wisps of smoke from burning herbs curl into the night sky, fading above rooftops where prayers were whispered and tears dried on weary cheeks. Fear of sickness still clings in the air, but so too does something stronger. The steady sound of bells from a nearby church tower. Their echoes cut through silence, carrying not only the weight of mourning, but also the promise of order, meaning, and hope. For in this fragile world of hunger and plague, it was not medicine or cleanliness that truly held people together. It was belief. The chanting of monks in cloisters, the glow of candles against cold stone, the sight of a procession winding through muddy streets. These were the rhythms that gave shape to existence. Faith could not cure fevers or chase fleas, but it gave suffering. A story turned despair into penance and made death itself feel less final. You step forward from the smoky huts and crowded graveyards towards soaring spires, gilded altars, and the living heartbeat of community life. Ahead lies not just prayer, but power. The intricate weave of religion and society that shaped every thought, every fear, every joy of the medieval world. The bells draw you closer, their bronze throats booming across rooftops, vibrating through your chest. You follow the sound until the narrow lanes open onto a square dominated by stone, the church. Its spire pierces the sky, its shadow stretching over market stalls, cottages, and the very ground you stand on. This is not just a building, it is the center of everything. Step inside and the world changes. The air is cool, thick with incense, heavy with the faint musk of damp stone. Candles flicker along altars, their wax dripping in golden threads. You hear chanting the low drone of monks reciting prayers, words you do not fully understand but feel in your bones. It is hypnotic, like waves pulling you out to sea. Here time itself is measured by the church. Bells mark the hours of prayer, the days of fasting, the seasons of feast. Your life bends to their rhythm. Birth is greeted with baptism, marriage blessed at the altar, death sealed with last rites. Every moment is punctuated by ritual, and without it, you would be adrift. But the church is more than ritual, it is power. Priests collect tithes, their purses heavy with the coin of every villager. Bishops wield authority as sharp as any lord's sword. The Pope himself is a figure of awe and terror, his decrees reaching across kingdoms like invisible chains. To defy him is to risk not just excommunication, but damnation of the soul. You cannot fight that with pitchforks or armor. Eternity is longer than any king's reign, and yet amid all the power, there is comfort. On cold nights, the church offers warmth and bread. Monks copy books that preserve wisdom. Pilgrims rest under its roof. Even the poorest feel dignity when they kneel beside the richest, all equal beneath painted saints staring down from stained glass. For a moment you breathe the same air, sing the same hymns, believe the same story. You can almost smell it. Incense and beeswax mingling with the faint odor of sweat from peasants packed shoulder to shoulder. You can almost see the flicker of candlelight on carved stone saints, watching with painted eyes. And you can almost feel the weight of belonging, both a burden and a comfort pressing down on you, as surely as the church roof presses down on its pillars. This is the heartbeat of your world faith, as ruler. Faith as shelter. Faith as the fragile glue holding chaos together. Faith does not live only in soaring spires or solemn chants. It seeps into the smallest corners of daily life, into every gesture, every word, every superstition whispered at dawn. When you wake, you cross yourself before rising, whispering a prayer that fleas will bite less. Today that bread will stretch further, that your cough will not worsen. Before planting seeds, you sprinkle holy water on the soil. Before baking bread, you carve a cross in the dough. Faith threads through each task like invisible stitching, binding the ordinary to the divine. Festivals burst like fire into this rhythm. Candlemas Easter Corpus Christi days when the streets erupt with color and song. Picture a procession, priests in golden vestments. Banners snapping in the wind, incense smoke trailing like a ghost. Children scatter flowers. Musicians drum and pipe, and you follow the crowd through muddy streets lit by torches. For a few hours, hunger and sickness vanish, replaced by a collective joy that feels almost sacred. But faith is not only joy, it is also fear. A sudden storm sparks whispers of God's anger. A child born with a deformity is seen as a sign of sin. Comets streaking across the sky send shivers through villages. Their fiery tails read as omens of plague or war. You hear gossip at wells and markets. The stars are warning us, the saints are weeping, the devil walks in the night. In a world without science, superstition is the only vocabulary people have to explain the inexplicable. And so charms and rituals multiply. Amulets of bone or herbs hang around children's necks. Prayers are etched on parchment and swallowed in wine. Pilgrims hobble on bare feet to shrines, blisters bleeding lips, mumbling desperate petitions. Faith is not a choice, it is survival. To doubt is to stand naked before storms, sickness, and death. Yet here, too, lies humor, though often dark. A priest scolds villagers for superstition, then secretly consults an astrologer before traveling. A noble scoffs at relics, then kisses a saint's toe before battle. Hypocrisy blends with sincerity until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. Perhaps even they could not. Close your eyes, and you hear it all, the chant of prayers rising in cold churches, the laughter of children scattering petals, the mutter of women hanging charms at doorways, the solemn toll of bells marking hours you cannot control. Faith is everywhere, comforting, frightening, often absurd, but always present. And as you drift from these rituals, you sense the deeper weave of religion into society itself. Beyond prayer and superstition, faith dictates laws, crowns kings, and shapes the very order of life. The path ahead leads not only through churches and chapels, but through power itself, where belief is as sharp as any blade. The incense fades, the chants linger in your ears, and when you step back into the daylight, you realize the church is not only a place of worship, it is the skeleton of law and the nervous system of politics. Kings wear crowns, but they kneel before bishops for coronation. A farmer pays his lord in grain, but he pays his priest in coin confession and obedience. Every decision, from planting crops to declaring war, bends beneath the weight of religion. A king does not simply march an army, he calls a crusade, cloaking steel in holiness. A judge does not simply condemn a thief, he invokes divine justice, declaring that God himself demands the sentence. Even taxes are sanctified, the tithe, 1/10 of your harvest collected, not by secular force, but by sacred decree. Picture yourself in a village court. A priest sits beside the bailiff, his voice calm but absolute. He listens to disputes over fields, over cattle, over debts, and with a few Latin words decides fates. You may not understand the language, but you feel its power. Law here is not impartial, it is draped in vestments, heavy with incense. To defy it is not only rebellion against men, but rebellion against God. And politics. Faith coils through it like smoke through rafters. Princes quarrel. Popes excommunicate, emperors bend. You hear rumors of kings begging barefoot in snow for absolution, of nobles risking damnation to resist Rome's grasp. Alliances shift not only with marriages and swords, but with papal bulls' sermons and whispered accusations of heresy. You can almost see the parchment, sealed with wax, the red robes of cardinals, glinting like fire in torchlight. The trembling hands of peasants signing with a cross because they cannot write their names. Religion is not merely belief, it is power structured into every decision. And the irony, bitter as old wine is, this the church that preached humility, wielded wealth greater than kings. Monasteries owned lands wider than villages. Bishops dined on feasts while peasants gnawed crusts. The bells that called to prayer also reminded you who truly ruled your life. But no power is without cracks. Beneath the chanting and the gilded altars lurks fear, the fear of dissent. To doubt the church was to doubt the very fabric of society, and so heresy became the most dangerous crime of all. Imagine whispers in a tavern. A man mutters that priests are too rich, that Christ walked barefoot, but bishops ride in silk saddles. Another claims that bread at Mass is only bread, not the body of God. The air sharpens, the room stills. These are not idle musings, they are blades cutting the bonds of faith. And soon enough, someone reports them. Trials follow. A man stands before clerics, candles flickering, shadows stretching across his trembling face. He denies nothing, but his words are dangerous. For that he may burn. You picture the pyre, the crackle of kindling, the acrid smoke rising as villagers watch. Fear grips everyone, not just of the fire, but of the idea that someone dared to speak differently. And yet dissent grows. In valleys and cities, groups gather in secret, Waldensians preaching poverty, Lollards muttering translations of scripture, mystics claiming visions outside church control. Their voices are soft at first, but they ripple outward, unsettling the silence. Faith is unity, but unity can suffocate. To breathe differently is heresy, and heresy threatens to fracture the world. Communities cling to conformity because survival depends on it. If one person is accused, neighbors rush to distance themselves. Families denounce kin friends, betray friends. Better to sacrifice one than risk suspicion for all. The smell of burning heretics lingers not just in the square, but in the minds of those who betrayed them. It is fear turned into glue, sticky and sour. Yet the irony cannot be missed. Heretics often mirror the very faith they challenge. They pray, they fast, they serve the poor. Their crime is not abandoning God, but daring to believe differently about him. You wonder as you watch the flames whether their whispers sound so dangerous only because they are too close to truth. Close your eyes and you hear it all. The drone of sermons, the hiss of rumors, the roar of fire. You smell incense and smoke together, holy and profane mingled into one. Faith binds, faith burns, faith sustains, faith destroys. It is the thread weaving every life, but it is a thread stretched taut, trembling with tension. And as the last cries of dissent fade into silence, the bells ring again, summoning people not to think, but to obey. You step away carrying the weight of faith's comfort and cruelty alike in a head. The story bends once more, not toward prayers, but toward dangers. More immediate crime in the alleys, punishments in the square, and the peril that waits behind every medieval corner. When thieves are caught, when murderers are dragged from taverns or bandits from the road, their fate becomes not just justice, but entertainment. Punishment here is never private, it is spectacle. Picture the square at dawn. Crowds gather, breath clouding in the cold air. Vendors sell hot ale, children sit on shoulders, and everyone waits for the show. A thief has let out his hands, bound his face pale. He is not alone. The whole community is here to watch him pay. The executioner raises a knife not to kill, but to mark. The thief's ear is sliced off, a sharp cry echoing as blood trickles down his neck. The crowd murmurs, some gasp, some nod. Justice has spoken. The missing ear will brand him forever. Each punishment is designed not just to hurt, but to display. Stocks and pillories follow the same logic. Offenders are locked in wooden frames left for hours or days, while villagers throw food, mud, or stones. The laughter is cruel but purposeful. Everyone sees the consequence. Everyone remembers. You hear the mocking shouts, smell the stench of spoiled vegetables hurled at the prisoner's head, see the tears running down his cheeks. It is humiliation sharpened into law. For worse crimes, the spectacle grows darker. Murderers hang from gallows, their bodies swaying in the wind, ravens pecking at their eyes. Some are left for weeks, grim warnings at the edge of roads. Traitors may face dismemberment, limbs hacked and displayed at city gates, flies buzzing. The horror is deliberate. It etches obedience into memory. But punishment is not only terror, it is community theater. Markets pause, taverns empty. Children are brought to watch. For a few hours, the community unites in judgment. It is both grotesque and binding. You feel it in the crowd, the strange excitement, the uneasy thrill of watching pain that is not yours. And here lies the black humor. People complain about corruption one day, then cheer as a pickpocket loses fingers the next. They laugh as if cruelty is comedy, shrug as if death is ordinary. And perhaps it is. In a world where life is cheap and danger constant, punishment becomes reassurance. The scaffold says someone is in control. You stand among the crowd, the smell of blood and sweat heavy, the cries of the punished ringing in your ears. Justice here is not blind, it is loud, messy, and unforgettable. And as you step away, you realize fear is not simply law's tool, it is law's foundation. Danger in the medieval world is not dramatic, it is ordinary. You wake to it, walk through it, sleep beside it. In the town's crooked lanes, danger is as common as bread. Picture the morning market. Vendors shout above the din, women jostle with baskets, children dart underfoot. It seems lively safe. Yet your eyes catch the slight flick of a hand, a boy slipping a knife under a belt, easing away with a purse clutched like treasure. You shout too late. He vanishes into the press of bodies, the crowd closing behind him like water. By the time the bailiff arrives breathless, the thief is long gone. By daylight, cut purses are quick. By night, robbers are bold. Narrow alleys turn into hunting grounds. Torches sputter, shadows stretch, and the scrape of footsteps quickens your own. Sometimes it is only a drunk staggering home. Sometimes it is worse. A blade glints, a hand seizes your cloak, and suddenly the dark feels like a coffin. Beyond the walls, the danger multiplies. Roads are ribbons of mud and stone threading through forests where branches tangle like grasping claws. Merchants know better than to travel alone. Convoys rattle with wagons, guards march stiff with spears. Pilgrims huddle under cloaks whispering prayers. But even numbers are no guarantee. Ambush comes quick, a whistle, the snap of bowstrings, the crash of hooves. A barrel tips a horse, screams, men scatter as purses and lives are torn away. Chroniclers tell of noblemen stripped bare on highways, of abbots robbed of gold chalices, of pilgrims left with nothing but the tatters on their backs. Some roads were infamous, Sherwood's forest in England whispered, with legends of outlaws, the Alps crawling with brigands who preyed on travelers like wolves. Even rivers had their predators, river pirates rowing silently through fog, cutting mooring ropes, vanishing before dawn. And taverns, oh the taverns. You duck into one for warmth, the air thick with smoke and ale. The benches creak, mugs slam, dice clatter. Then an insult flies about a wife, a wager, a stolen glance. A chair splinters, a knife flashes, the room explodes. Blood spatters on rush-strewn floors, the smell sharp as iron under the stink of beer. No one intervenes unless it's their kin. Sometimes the fight ends with laughter and claps on the back. Sometimes someone dies and his body is carried out without ceremony. Living here means walking always with your shoulders tight, your ears pricked, your pouch hidden deep. Danger is not an exception. It is the fabric of life, as constant as hunger, as inevitable as rain. If danger was constant, so too was its shadow punishment. And just as danger was ordinary, punishment was spectacular. Justice in the medieval world was never meant to be private, it was meant to be performed. The square fills at dawn. Smoke from cook fires drifts above the roofs, mingling with the excitement of a crowd gathering for Justice Day. Vendors hawk hot ale and fried cakes, as though the scaffold were a stage at a fair. Children climb onto barrels for a better view. The condemned is brought forward pale in trembling chains, clinking with each step. For a thief, the sentence might be mutilation. A knife slices off an ear, or a hand is branded with a hot iron. The hiss sharp, the smell of burnt flesh rolling over the crowd. Some gasp, others nod, a few cheer. It is horror as lesson, let this scar be the law's memory written on flesh. Stocks and pillories are common punishments. You see a woman locked with her head and arms in wooden boards, unable to swat away the rotten cabbage splattering her face. A man sits in the stocks while boys smear dung on his cheeks, laughter ringing louder than his groans. The humiliation is deliberate. The pain is secondary. The point is to be seen, to be mocked, to be remembered. But some punishments border on cruel comedy. Women accused of gossiping or scolding their husbands may be strapped to a ducking stool, dunked repeatedly into a pond until they choke and cough, the crowd roaring. Bakers caught selling light bread are tied to carts' loaves, hung mockingly from their necks. Dishonest innkeepers are paraded with watered ale sloshing in buckets. Even justice cannot resist a punchline. For serious crimes, the theater turns grim. Murderers swing from gallows, their bodies twisting in the wind for weeks, ravens plucking at their eyes. Traitors face the knife, quartered, their limbs nailed to city gates, their heads stuck on spikes to rot above crowds. The smell carries for days, a sour reminder that treason leaves more than wounds. Not all punishments end in death, but all are meant to be spectacles. To punish is to teach, and teaching means showing. The law's true power lies not in the pain of the condemned, but in the gasp of the crowd. The nervous glance of a child, the whispered fear of neighbors. What if it's me next? And yet the crowd loves it. Markets pause, taverns empty. Mothers hoist children onto shoulders. Justice is not just order, it is entertainment. You stand there too, half sickened, half compelled, watching as pain becomes theater. Theater becomes memory, and memory becomes law. In a world where danger never sleeps, justice answers with noise, blood, and humiliation. And as you step away from the square, the cries of the punished still echo in your ears, you realize the scaffold is as much a stage as any church or hall. Fear is the foundation. Fear is the glue. If gallows and pillories were the common notes of justice, the medieval world also composed stranger verses, punishments so bizarre, they seem almost like grim jokes whispered across centuries. Yet to those who lived them, there was nothing funny at all. Take the baker who cheats the weight of bread. In some towns, he is not merely fined or pilloried. Instead, he is tied to his own cart loaves, dangling mockingly around his neck, paraded through the streets while children jeer and pelt him with crusts. A loaf of fraud becomes a necklace of shame. Or the dishonest merchant who waters wine, he may be forced to drink his own diluted brew until he vomits the crowd roaring with laughter at his gagging. The punishment is poetic in its cruelty, make the cheater choke on his own crime. Animal-related punishments were stranger still. In certain places, pigs accused of biting children were dressed in human clothes and hanged in the marketplace. Imagine the surreal sight, a squealing animal in breeches, a noose tightening the crowd, watching solemnly as though justice truly demanded it. To modern eyes, it is absurd, yet to the medieval mind, it was moral order made visible. Public shaming could be even more grotesque. Adulterers might be forced to run naked through streets while neighbors whipped their backs with nettles. Blasphemers had tongues pierced with hot irons, the hiss of flesh silenced by screams. Gossiping women could be fitted with scolds' bridles, iron masks, with spikes pressing the tongue, turning chatter into agony. You can almost hear the metal-scraped teeth, the muffled sobs behind the gag. The cruelty often wore a theatrical mask. The goal was not only to punish, but to stage morality, to transform crime into spectacle. Crowds laughed at ridiculous parades, recoiled at brutal mutilations, gawked at animals and nooses. Each punishment was both sermon and carnival act. And yet these punishments reveal more about society than about the criminals. They show a world obsessed with order, terrified of chaos, willing to make justice into farce if it kept the crowd obedient. You taste the bitterness in your mouth, laughter mingled with cruelty, morality served with humiliation. The square empties, but echoes remain. Jeers, sobs, the bleating of a pig swinging from a rope. Justice here is not blind, it grins, grimaces, and growls as strange as it is savage. The deeper you drift into these punishments, the more a question presses against you: was this really justice, or was it simply entertainment dressed in law's robes? Stand again in the square. The sun is high, and villagers gather as eagerly as if for a festival. Children snack on apples, women gossip, men laugh. The condemned is brought forward, chains rattling. The mood is not solemn, it is electric. This is not mourning, this is spectacle. The executioner knows his role. He sharpens his blade with exaggerated slowness, letting the rasp of steel echo through the hush. He lifts his axe for the crowd to see, pausing long enough for anticipation to swell. When the blow falls clean or clumsy, the gasp is collective. For a moment, everyone is united: peasants, nobles, priests, in the thrill of witnessing fate. It is a theater with no curtain. Pain is the script, humiliation, the scenery, blood, the applause line. People come not just to learn a lesson, but to feel alive in the face of another's suffering. It is reassurance, it is him, not me. You sense the contradiction. The same villagers who kneel in church praying for mercy jeer with delight at the stocks. The same priest who preaches forgiveness blesses the scaffold. Compassion and cruelty live side by side, never questioning each other. That tension is the soul of medieval justice. Perhaps nothing shows it more than the slow death penalties. Burning at the stake turns execution into ritual bonfire, the smell of charred flesh clinging to clothes long after. Drawing and quartering stretches the spectacle into hours, limbs nailed on gates to remind the living. It is excessive, but excess is the point. The law teaches through horror, and horror requires an audience. Yet beneath the cruelty lies fear. Fear of disorder, of rebellion, of sin breaking free. By turning punishment into theater, authorities harness fear into obedience. The crowd laughs, yes, but beneath the laughter is relief. Watching someone else suffer convinces them they are safe. For now, you walk away from the square, the cries fading into memory. The line between justice and entertainment has blurred until you cannot see it at all. Was this morality, or was it simply cruelty made communal? In truth, it was both. And in that paradox lies the essence of medieval law, brutal, theatrical binding. Ahead, your path shifts once more. Beyond punishment and peril waits the final act of daily life, the fragile rest of night. For even after gallows creaked and bells tolled, every soul still returned to the simple human need to sleep. And in that sleep, perhaps a brief escape from hunger, fear, and the iron hand of justice. The crowd disperses, leaving behind only the creak of empty scaffolds and the faint smell of smoke and blood hanging in the square. The sun sinks shadows stretching long over cobblestones polished by countless boots. Danger and punishment retreat into silence, but another world begins to stir the world of night. For no matter how cruel the day, the body still aches for rest. and so you walk away from gallows and jeers into darkness where beds of straw hearth embers and whispered prayers await. The last bell tolls, echoing off timbered roofs, and shutters slam shut one by one. Darkness falls thick and sudden, for there are no street lamps, no neon, no hum of wires, only moonlight. If you're lucky, and pitch black if clouds smother the sky. The town changes with nightfall. The noise of markets fades, replaced by the creak of doors, the murmur of families settling, and the occasional bark of a dog warning unseen intruders. The smell of supper still lingers, cabbage stew in peasant huts, spiced meat in noble kitchens, but soon even that fades into smoke from dying fires. You step through narrow lanes, feeling the uneven cobblestones underfoot, damp with the day's refuse. The stench of waste and dung doesn't sleep. It grows heavier as the air cools. Danger is not gone. The watchman makes his rounds, lantern swinging, but shadows remain full of possibility thieves, lurking drunken brawls stumbling into alleys, the sudden cry of a woman clutching her purse. Still, most people do not linger outdoors. They withdraw inside, closing the world out with bolts and prayers. Step into a peasant cottage. The single room glows faintly with embers. A family huddles together on straw, bedding children pressed against parents for warmth. The air is smoky, itchy with fleas, but exhaustion makes the body heavy. Clothes are rarely changed, feet rarely washed, but eyes drift closed anyway. Survival demands rest. Now step into a manor. Servants clear the great hall, snuffing candles, sweeping rushes. The lord retreats to his chamber, climbing into a bed draped with furs. Curtains are drawn around the mattress, not just for warmth, but to ward off drafts and insects. A servant murmurs prayers, another stirs the fire. The chamber smells of wax fur and sweat beneath perfume. Luxury does not erase discomfort, it only disguises it. Nightfall is not silence, but transformation. Towns shrink inward, fires burn, low hearts slow their beating. The world turns private, hidden, fragile. You feel it as you walk, the town's pulse softening, preparing for the uneasy embrace of sleep. To lie down in the medieval world is to confront the raw truth of sleep. Comfort is rare and rest is fragile. For peasants, the bed is little more than a pile of straw stuffed into a coarse sack laid directly on the floor. The smell is unmistakable, musty, earthy, tinged with sweat and livestock. Fleas swarm in the stalks, mice rustle in the corners. Families crowd together, bodies pressed for warmth. You feel the weight of a child's head on your arm, the damp breath of a sibling on your neck, the itch of vermin crawling unseen. Privacy is a dream reserved for lords. Nobles sleep differently, but not always better. Their beds are large, built of carved wood, layered with feather mattresses, wool blankets, and fur throws. Curtains enclose the space, trapping warmth, but also the stale odor of unwashed bodies and perfume. The softness feels strange if you are used to straw sinking, smothering, almost unsettling. Even luxury cannot silence snores, coughs, or the endless scurrying of rats in the walls. Sleep itself is divided. People rarely sleep through the night. They drift off after supper, wake at midnight to stir the fire prey or even visit neighbors, then return for a second sleep before dawn. The night is broken, restless, threaded with waking moments. Dreams fill the gaps, visions of saints, omens of demons, the subconscious woven into faith. You might dream of feasts if you are hungry, or of plagues if the air outside carries whispers of sickness. Superstition follows you even into bed. Amulets are hung above doors, charms placed under pillows. A prayer is muttered against nightmares, crosses traced on foreheads of children. Sleep is not just rest, it is vulnerability. To close your eyes is to surrender, and so protection is sought in ritual as much as in blankets. You breathe it in now. The musty straw, the smoky rafters, the faint tang of wax from a guttering candle. Sleep comes slowly, uneven, fragile. Yet when it arrives, it is as necessary as bread, as sacred as prayer. And as you sink into the straw or feathers, you realize the medieval day does not end. It only pauses. Behind closed eyes, hunger, danger, and faith wait patiently for morning to wake them again. Sleep comes, but never in silence. In the medieval night, dreams carry weight heavier than the straw beneath your head. To dream is not just to rest, it is to receive messages, warnings, or temptations. You drift, and visions rise. For the peasant, hunger often shapes dreams. You see loaves of white bread floating in the air, feast tables laden with venison, rivers of ale spilling into mugs. You reach for them, but they vanish with waking, leaving only the bitter taste of cabbage soup on your tongue. For the noble, the dreams are gilded tournaments, hunts, banquets overflowing. Yet even they dream of shadows, plots, betrayal, the looming presence of death in velvet halls. Nightmares are feared as signs. A black dog padding through your dream may mean illness. Falling from towers suggests disgrace. Dreams of fire foretell war, of water foretell plague. You wake with your heart pounding, sweat clinging, and at once whisper prayers to saints hoping the visions fade. Sometimes priests are consulted as interpreters. Other times neighbors whisper their own meanings. You saw teeth in your dream, someone close will die. But dreams are not only omens, they are battlegrounds. The church warns of demons that creep into sleep, whispering temptations, stirring lust, planting blasphemy. Nightmares become proof of weakness, visions of guilt. A young monk may wake shaking, convinced Satan visited him. A mother may cross herself after dreaming of her child drowning. Night is not safe. Even the mind betrays you. And yet there is strange comfort too. Some dreams are believed to be divine. A vision of a saint offering bread, a candle lit in darkness. A voice whispering hope, these are cherished, written down, sometimes even used to inspire pilgrimages or sermons. In a world with few certainties, dreams offer meaning where none exists. You feel it as you lie in straw or feathers, the silence of the room broken only by snores, the occasional crackle of fire. You drift and your mind paints images you cannot control. The smell of incense from church lingers in your thoughts, blending with the smoke of your hearth. Your dreams are as fragile and muddled as your waking life, half hunger, half holiness, half terror. And when you wake, you are never quite sure which half is truer. The medieval night is not empty. It hums with fears, with whispers, with unseen presences pressing at the edges of your bed. Darkness is total. With shutters closed and candles guttered, the blackness is so deep it feels solid, like a weight pressing against your eyes. Every creak of wood, every rustle of straw sounds louder. A rat scurrying becomes a thief. A branch tapping against the roof becomes a demon's claw. You curl tighter, heart racing. People believe the night belongs to spirits. Ghosts wander the roads, souls of the unshriven restless until prayers are said. Witches ride the wind, slipping through cracks, stealing milk, knotting horses' manes. Demons sit on chests, pressing breath from lungs in what we now call sleep paralysis, but what they called the mare of the night. You wake gasping, unable to move, convinced claws still scratch at your ribs. Amulets guard against these terrors. A charm of iron at the door, a sprig of rosemary under the pillow, a saint's medal strung above the bed. Mothers trace crosses on children's foreheads, muttering prayers against witches. Some sprinkle holy water on doorsteps, others hang carved faces to scare spirits away. Still fear lingers. The night is never truly yours, it belongs to the unseen. Travelers dread it most. On roads after dusk, lanterns flicker, weakly wolves howl in forests, and every shadow might hide more than bandits. Stories spread of phantom hunters, headless riders, spectral armies marching silently across fields. You hear them in your mind, hooves thundering with no horses in sight, voices whispering in languages unknown. Night amplifies imagination until it feels like revelation. But fear also binds communities. Families huddle together telling tales by firelight, the crackle of flames drowning the silence. Neighbors gather to share ale, delaying the walk home until courage is brewed. Children cling to mothers, their small breaths mingling their wide eyes, watching the dark. Night terrifies, but it also forces closeness. A fragile shield against the vast unknown. You breathe in the smoky air of the cottage, hear the faint crack of wood, feel the straw prick your skin. Darkness presses, but so does warmth. The body beside you, the whispered prayer above you, the faint rhythm of sleep surrounding you. The night is full of spirits, yes, but also full of humanity enduring together. And as your eyes drift shut again, you sense the paradox of the medieval night. It is both terror and rest, haunted and wholly suffocating and soothing. In the blackness, dreams and demons mingle, and dawn feels like resurrection each time it comes. The dark has settled into the bones of the town, and with it comes the rule that makes night survivable: curfew. You hear it before you see anything. A horn's low moan, then a clapper's wooden knock echoing along the lane. Doors thud shut like eyelids. Bolts slide home. The street exhales a last breath of smoke and gossip, and then it is simply closed. You step into the hush and feel instantly exposed. The town is a maze of black corridors, timbered walls leading toward each other like eavesdropping giants. Somewhere a dog snarls. Somewhere else a drunk sings to the moon in a language only the moon understands. Above a shutter cracks open. A face peers down, decides you are not important, and vanishes. The watchmen own this hour. Lantern light licks the cobble's tiny islands in an ocean of ink. Their halberds tap a steady beat. Iron tips kissing stone to announce the law. Be indoors. Be silent. Be safe, at least safe enough. They stop you with a palm and the bored authority of men who have heard every excuse. Where are you going? Why are you out? Your words puff into white ghosts before your lips. They listen for lies the way innkeepers listen for coins. Curfew is less about silence than about power. Night magnifies fear, and fear makes rules feel reasonable. If darkness is a field where danger grows wild, the watchmen are its gardeners pruning with threats and fines. Break the hour and you buy yourself trouble at night. In a stone cell that smells like old rain and older sweat, or a public lecture at dawn delivered via stocks and laughs. You walk on aloud for now, your feet learning the map of safe steps between puddles you do not wish to identify. Above your head, eaves drip. Below your boots, something squelches. To your left, a cat becomes a demon, and then relieved a cat again. That is the arithmetic of night. Every unknown equals the worst thing until proven otherwise. Beyond the gates, the curfew is a thicker thing. Roads shut the way, mouths shut during plague. Travelers huddle at inns barred from crossing bridges, whose keepers prefer to count coins in daylight. The world narrows to hearth circles, to the reach of a poker in a fire. You think of the field's black seas where wolves write their own laws. You think of the forests where bandits and legends curl up in the roots and wait for someone late alone and persuadable. Back inside the town, the watch makes its rounds with rituals half practical, half superstition. They test door latches with a tug. Are you fool enough to invite thieves? They pause at the church to cross themselves. A splash of holy water against the teeth of night. One coughs, one mutters that his wife burns rosemary when he's on duty. One tells a story about a man who heard steps behind him and turned to find nobody, only fewer heartbeats left to spend. And then there is fire. Nothing terrifies a sleeping town like the snap of flame. The watch keeps its ears tuned to the pitch of panic. A scream pitched too high is a plea. A scream pitched lower, a fight. But the scream pitched ragged, punctuated by crackle that is fire. In an instant, dogs howl bells, writhe buckets leap into hands. You see it now, a line of silhouettes hauling water from the well lips, salted with ash eyes burning with heat and fear. Night, it turns out, is not just for thieves, but for the quick arithmetic of survival wood plus spark equals ruin unless multiplied by neighbors. Curfew stitches. The town's shut, but not perfectly. Threads come loose, a midwife knocking for help. A baker rising early to nurse embers, a pair of lovers who miscalculated the distance between desire and dawn. The watchmen see more than they report. They let some things pass because insisting on every law is a good way to make people choose chaos. The art of night is knowing which shadows to leave alone. You finally reach your door. The key scrapes iron. The bolt bites home, and you stand in the breathing dark of your own small kingdom. Behind the curtains, the bed waits with its usual bouquet, straw wool, a rumor of last night's sweat. Curfew hums outside like a distant hive. You are inside the rule now, and the rule is inside you. The lesson is simple, if not exactly comforting. The night can be negotiated, but never tamed. Sleep in this world never comes as a single generous river. It comes in two cautious streams. The first carries you from the clatter of evening to the middle hush, a few hours of warm surrender. Then, as if your body has remembered a chore, undone your eyes open. The fire has collapsed into a red jaw of coals. The room is a ghost of heat and a rumor of breath. Somewhere outside, a cock lies to the moon and crows too early. You sit up. This is the wide, odd hour between sleeps, the midnight watch, no clock marks. In cottages, parents stir to check the infant or the stew hung close to embers so it won't sour. In manors, servants wake to bank fires and empty chamber pots. Monks rise for nocturnes, chanting thin lines of Latin, that climb the rafters like ivy. The town is both asleep and not hearts beating in staggered time zones under a shared sky. You add a stick to the fire and it complains into flame. The room changes color from black to ember orange. For a moment you listen, mice turning straw into speech, your own breath. Measuring distance, the rain's finger on the shutter. If you are lucky, second sleep arrives quickly, a patient horse returning to the hand. If not, the mind begins its parade. It starts small, a loaf count, a debt sum, a remembered insult reheated like yesterday's stew. Then come the larger beasts. What if the grain rots? What if the fever returns? What if the child's cough is the first footstep of something with many feet? You know the cure, a prayer, a sip of ale, the slow discipline of counting breaths as if tallying sheep you can't afford. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the mind insists on being its own watchman, pacing the walls of the skull with a lantern no one else can see. There are customs for this hour. Some slip outside for a piss under the grudging stars, steam ghosting up from cold earth. Some neighbors exchange a whispered word through a shared wall, an old habit from older winters, when conversation was another blanket. Lovers reach for each other because the body has its own liturgy, one that requires no priest. And in rare households, work happens, a weaver adds a few inches to a stubborn cloth. A baker shapes loaves so dawn will have a reason to get up. Then, as if the sky remembered an appointment, the eastern black loosens its fist. Not light yet, only the idea of light. You sense it first with your ears, roosters testing vowels, a cart, far off, trying on its morning creak. Your nose confirms it next, smoke sweetening into something like hope, as hearths are bribed awake, rye volunteering its sour promise to the day. Second sleep releases you, or doesn't. Either way, the ritual proceeds. You pull on yesterday's shirt because today's shirt is a rumor, and rumors don't keep you warm. You rake coals into modest flame and bully water into a boil. A prayer unrolls from your lips with the sleepy dignity of a worn banner. Outside, the watchmen fold the night and pocket it. The curfew dissolves into chores. Your door opens to a world busy, pretending it always meant to be safe. A hawker tries out his prices on the empty street. A dog auditions for the position of town crier. The butcher's boy runs late with a bundle that leaks a red signature onto the lane. Clouds decide how cruel they'll be about rain. Everything smells like the first paragraph of a familiar book. Damp wood, warm breath, the faint iron promise of work. You carry last night with you the hush of curfew, the flare of the ember, the soft argument of worries. But the light has a short memory. It drags the town toward itself like a patient parent tugging children from bed. Soon there will be markets again, and bread weighed with suspicion, and a priest with more to say than your patience can balance. Soon the day will resume its old trick of being ordinary and dangerous at once. You step into it. Behind you, the bed waits with the long patience of straw. Ahead, the morning practices being brave. Between them, you another body bargaining with hunger law and luck. Night has taught its lesson again, rest is alone, dawn the collector, and the terms are renewed every day you wake. The night folds itself away, leaving only the faint warmth of straw and the ache of unfinished dreams. Dawn presses through cracks and shutters, turning smoke-gray rooms into gold-streaked chambers. The town stirs, roosters crow, children whimper for bread merchants, stretch stiff limbs. Life begins again, not in silence, but in the rhythm of families rising together. Here, in the fragile warmth of morning bonds, matter most. A hand passing bread across a table, a child's laughter. Piercing the smoke, a wife whispering a prayer over her husband's shoulder. These are the threads that weave survival into community. But family is not only love. It is law, it is labor, it is inheritance. Who you marry decides your fortune. Who you bury decides your debts. Who you leave behind carries both your name and your burdens. As the sun climbs higher, the story bends from the private hush of night toward the louder stage of kinship duty and legacy. For in this world, every cradle rocks beside a grave, and every promise of love is shadowed by questions of land dowry and blood. Morning tastes like smoke and warm bread. You tear a crust, pass it across the table, and in that small gesture you feel the gravity of the day a match is being made. In this world, marriage is not merely love in a garland, it is logistics with flowers on top. A contract that smells faintly of ink, sweat, and ale. You hear it in the house before you see it. Mothers muttering numbers, fathers weighing promises, an aunt clucking her tongue with the precision of an accountant. How many hens? How much land? What of the dowry, the trousseau, the linen chest? And the bride, can she spin, bake, keep house, tend the garden patch? The groom, can he plow straight, fix a roof, keep a temper sober enough to count coins correctly? In a world where winter is an annual exam and famine, the harshest grader a spouse is not a romance, so much as a partner in the survival business. Still, there are moments that pretend otherwise. The two of you stole into the well by accident, your fingers brushing over a bucket handle. A glance held too long at mass. A lark of laughter overheard from behind a door. Love slips through practical questions like sunlight through shutters, thin, brief, but real. And yet you know the rule: if affection contradicts acreage, affection loses. Land does not blush. Land pays taxes. The matchmakers arrive with the practiced walk of diplomats. Their voices purl like silk over splinters. This union would be advantageous. Their fields share a boundary. His uncle is generous when he drinks. Documents appear but slowly, as if shy. Names bloom on parchment, some signed in tight scripts, some scrawled as crosses by those who let faith write for them. Each letter is a promise you will be stuck with long after candles gutter. Then the band's 3 Sundays of public notice, so anyone with a reason to object can step forward. You stand in church hands damp, hearing your names rolled into Latin like dough into bread. The priest's voice makes them heavy. The town turns to look. Somewhere a child snickers because your names together sound like a barnyard joke. The 3rd Sunday comes, no one objects, at least not loudly, and the path is set. On the wedding day, the village becomes theater. Doors spill people into lanes. Bread emerges golden. Ale barrels are rolled like drums. The bride's hair smells of rosemary. The groom's tunic smells of fear and the best soap he could borrow. You walk not to trumpets, but to the steady applause of neighborly curiosity. At the church door, the priest's breath smells of onions and authority. He binds your hands with a stole, asks the ancient questions. Blesses you with a gesture that makes eternity feel as close as the fleas in your sleeves. There is a kiss. Awkward public logic problem solved with lips. There is a feast. Long tables, loud laughter pies that look like they could crow if poked. You dance clumsy and breathless while an uncle insists on demonstrating steps he claims are noble. Children under tables steal meat with the concentration of tiny thieves. Somewhere outside the future stares in through the window like a stray dog, patient, curious, certainly hungry. And then after the ale settles and the songs fade, the real work begins. Marriage is a set of hands to the plow, a second back beneath the yoke, a pair of ears for the weather's lies. You count seed together, you count coins together, you count breaths beside the fire and call it happiness. Because what else would you call it? Even love, the rare, bright kind, learns to speak the grammar of chores. You pass the bread again across the table, and that small arc is a vow repeated every morning we'll try. Yet nothing is simple. The church has rules that braid themselves into your bed. Degrees of kinship consanguinity charts that turn family trees into spider webs. Too close a cousin and your union is invalid. Feast days restrict when you can wed. Fast days restrict what you can eat after you have. Desertion, adultery, impotence, these words hover like moths around the flame of a marriage bed, and priests keep a list longer than your patience. Still you sleep. You dream of fields ungnawed by hail of hens generous with eggs of children, who arrive with fists unclenched. Morning returns. The bread is passed again. Your spouse breathes beside you with the steady optimism of lungs that refuse to negotiate with despair. If love is not always a choir, it is at least a hum. And in this world, a hum you can live to is better than silence. No sooner is the knot tied than the ledgers open. The medieval family is a small kingdom where politics begin at the cradle. Every birth is a celebration and a calculation. Another pair of hands for harvest, or another mouth for winter. You hold the swaddled bundle, inhale that warm, milky scent, and at the same time you count acres, animals, obligations. Love is immediate. Spreadsheets arrive by noon. The naming is a ritual with mathematics hidden in it. Name a child after a grandparent, and you summon goodwill, perhaps a loaf or a coin. Name after a saint, and you purchase invisible insurance. Godparents are chosen not only for piety, but for the heft of their purses and the firmness of their spines. You are stitching social fabric while the baby still hiccups like a tiny bellows. Then comes the ladder of inheritance, each rung smooth with centuries of feet. In some places, primogeniture rules. The eldest son gathers the field, the house, the stubborn mule with one mournful eye. Younger sons learn the distance between brother and tenant the hard way. They apprentice, they enlist, they pray for an uncle to die kindly. Daughters travel by dowry, the linen chest as ark, the coins as oars. If the chest is light, the river is rough. But customs tangle like brambles. In other lands, partible inheritance splits holdings like a loaf at a table. Every child gets a slice. The loaf looks generous at first. Years later, the family farm resembles a chessboard designed by a drunk surveyor. Paths cross fields, rights cross tempers, hedges multiply, and lawsuits sprout like nettles. Partible fairness breeds permanent negotiations. Widowhood redraws maps overnight. The day after a husband's death, a widow stands in a doorway that is both home and riddle. Dower rights promise her a third of the estate or a carefully specified share orchard rose. Grazing strips a corner of the granary's shadow. She clutches keys that feel heavier than before. Men eye boundary stones with friendly concern sharpened to opportunism. She learns to smile like a locked door. And if there are no sons, the air changes flavor. Uncles emerge with helpful suggestions. Cousins remind you of childhood games played on what they now call our land. A daughter may inherit, but her husband's hands will soon be in the flour, and the village will quietly revise its pronouns. A childless couple is a theological essay with a punchline nobody enjoys. Somewhere a monk mutters about God's will while a lawyer polishes his pen. Kinship is a currency as real as silver. A sister's marriage can reroute cart paths. A nephew's apprenticeship can open a gate in town walls that wouldn't budge for money. Feasts glue alliances. Funerals repave them. Baptisms decorate them with icing. Every embrace is an agreement. Every handshake seeds a future argument about hedges. And then there are the wills, the documents that turn grief into instructions. You sit at a table that smells of wax and ink while names are drafted into an afterlife of obligations. Candles to be burned for your soul because eternity needs lighting. Alms for the poor because heaven likes receipts, a few coins for the parish roof which always somehow leaks. Then the real meat fields to eldest cow, to second son, the good pot to the daughter, who remembered to visit when your cough grew interesting. You sign with a cross because handwriting is for the living. The priest nods. Your executor swallows. Somewhere a cousin begins sharpening a sense of injustice. Children complicate everything by being alive. They grow, they argue, they love the wrong people with frustrating sincerity. The eldest son wants to marry a girl with a laugh you can hear over 3 hedges and a dowry you can barely hear at all. A daughter wants to enter a convent because silence is cheaper than marriage. Another son prefers falcons to plows. You bargain, you bless, you bribe, you threaten, you pray. Family is a market where prices change hourly, but the goods cannot be returned. Still beneath the arithmetic lurks a softness you never admit in public. A small hand in yours while crossing a rutted lane. The solemn weight of a sleeping child against your shoulder as you carry them from hearth to bed. The smell of soap and wild onions in a daughter's hair. These details are not entered in ledgers, but they keep the ink from running. In the end, inheritance is not only about land moving like chess pieces, it is about stories traveling in bodies. Your gait in your son's walk, your mother's stubborn mouth in your daughter's arguments, your father's joke resurfacing at the worst possible moment. You die, yes, everyone does, but you leave behind a geography of gestures. The field remembers your footprints only until the next rain. Your children remember you longer stubborn as drought. You pass the bread one more time and the circle is complete, love as logistics, logistics as love. In this world, family is the grammar that turns hunger into a sentence and hope into a verb. You live inside it, you argue inside it, you rest inside it. And one day, when parchment and breath agree you are finished, the family will take your name, weigh it like a coin, and spend it into the future. You might think family is warmth by the hearth laughter at feasts, prayers, whispered in chapels. But families are also wolves, and inheritance is the bone they fight over. It begins in whispers. A cousin says the field by the river is his by right. An uncle insists your late father promised him the orchard. A sister's husband claims her dowry was short and should be corrected in land, not coin. What starts as polite talk by a fire becomes an argument in a marketplace, then fists in a tavern, then parchment drawn in a cold hall with ink that smells like finality. Courts are clogged with these quarrels. A monk's hand scratches your family's story into the margins of dusty rolls. Dispute over a hedge argument concerning a cow. Son refuses to yield to widow. Each word is a bruise turned permanent. The law pretends clarity, but clarity is expensive and most families can't afford it. So neighbors become judges, lords become referees, and sometimes fists decide what parchment cannot. The bitterness leaks into daily life. A man might refuse to share bread with a cousin who claims too much hay. A woman might avoid her sister's eyes at market, their husbands glowering like storm clouds behind them. Weddings fracture into tense gatherings where every laugh sounds suspicious. Funerals become negotiations, mourners counting candles while also counting acres. And if land is scarce, the fights sharpen. In villages pressed against forests or rivers, a strip of soil wide enough for 3 rows of grain becomes life or hunger. Brothers may split fields until the plots resemble ragged scars, each boundary stone. A grudge planted deep. One wrong harvest, one failed bargain, and blood can water the soil instead of rain. Even nobles are not immune. Their quarrels over castles and counties become wars, dragging peasants into mud and misery. A crown itself is only inheritance on a grand scale, an argument about which cousin's blood is more royal, which marriage more legitimate. Dynasties crumble as quickly as cottages when kinship turns to combat. You can almost hear it, the hiss of whispers at dawn, the slam of a fist on a table, the crackle of wax seals pressed on disputed wills. You smell it too, the sour sweat of men in heated argument, the ink sharp in your nose, the damp of courtrooms where parchment rots as quickly as patience. Kinship is meant to bind, but it often cuts. The family hearth may glow, but behind it burns a fire far more dangerous. If disputes expose the teeth of family, the laws of marriage and legitimacy reveal its bones. The medieval world had endless rules about who could marry whom, when, and why, and endless ways to break them. Start with consent. The church declared that a marriage was valid if 2 people exchanged vows freely, even without witnesses. That sounds simple, romantic even, but it meant a whispered promise behind a barn could bind for life. Families cursed lawyers, wept priests, muttered Latin, and hoped no one asked too many questions. Secret marriages bloomed like weeds only to explode into lawsuits when dowries were disputed. Then kinship charts tangled everything. Too close, a cousin forbidden. Degrees of blood stretched back so far that even villagers who barely knew their grandparents found themselves related in the eyes of canon law. Dispensations could be purchased, of course, if your purse was heavy enough. For the poor, forbidden love simply meant sin. For the rich, it meant a fine written in Latin. Bastards walked the hardest road. Born outside wedlock, they carried stigma like a brand. A bastard might inherit nothing. Might be barred from guilds, might find doors slammed before they even knocked. Yet some carved paths through sheer will soldiers, rising by sword priests, by piety merchants, by cunning. The law called them illegitimate. Life sometimes called them necessary. You see their eyes in taverns, bright with ambition, their laughter sharp as knives. Widows lived in a world half free, half bound. On paper, dower rights guaranteed a portion of land a home support. In practice, neighbors and in-laws circled like vultures. A widow with land was valuable, and suitors appeared quickly, sometimes kindly, sometimes with the force of law behind them. Remarriage was often less choice than strategy. A woman with children walked a tightrope, protect the heirs, preserve the estate, endure the pressure of men who preferred land to loneliness. And yet some widows wielded their position like steel. Freed from husbands, they managed estates, signed contracts, even lent money. Their names appear in records inked firmly where men thought only theirs belonged. They were exceptions, yes, but exceptions sharp enough to prove rules were made to be bent. Marriage laws, bastards, widows. All these rules and cracks reveal the same truth. Family was less a warm circle and more a chessboard. Every move carried weight, every misstep punishment, every pawn a person with breath and blood. The law tried to draw clean lines, but life smudged them constantly. Behind every sermon on holy matrimony lurked gossip about lovers. Behind every inheritance clause stood a widow with keys and sharp eyes. You feel it as you step away from the hall of disputes. The smell of ink and sweat lingers, the murmur of arguments clings to your ears. Marriage, blood, and law are not just private matters, They are the gears that grind society forward. But beyond them waits something more fragile and more eternal. The memory of the dead, the weight of time, and the stories left behind when names finally fade. The arguments over land quiet at last. Parchment sealed hands shaken with more suspicion than trust. The hearth burns low, children doze, and in the silence you feel another truth pressing at the edges of every family bond. All bargains end, all names eventually fall still. Fields may pass from father to son, dowries from bride to groom, but the bodies that tended them do not remain. You sense it in the hush after a quarrel, in the tired breath of an old man by the fire, in the way villagers glance at the churchyard as they walk past. Inheritance is only the shadow of the deeper fact that life bends always toward the grave. And in that grave wealth, love and labor meet their equal. So the story turns now from feasts and disputes to the last rituals that awaited everyone. For the medieval day did not end with sleep alone, it ended with death, and with the memories the living clung to in order to make sense of it. You carry bread to the table, water, to the firewood, to the hearth, and always, whether you notice or not, you also carry the nearness of death. It lingers like smoke in corners, like a shadow that never leaves. In this world, death is not an occasional guest. It is a permanent neighbor. You smell it in the churchyard as you pass damp earth, stirred too often, lime sprinkled over fresh graves. You see it in the faces of villagers worn thin by hunger skin, marked with smallpox scars, coughs rattling in chests that never quite clear. Children's laughter rings, but too often it is cut short by silence, a bed left cold. Life expectancy is not a comforting number. You are lucky to see 30 or 40. Many do not. A woman might die in childbirth. An infant might die before baptismal water dries. A wound festers from a rusted blade. A fever steals strength in a single night. Every day is a negotiation with chance, and chance rarely bargains. Yet death is not always feared as much as you imagine. It is familiar, woven into every prayer, every festival, every sermon. In marketplaces, skulls carved into stone remind you that mutton is fleeting, but eternity is not. Artists daub skeletal figures into manuscripts, dancing alongside peasants and popes alike. The danse macabre mocks all distinction. Worms do not care about velvet. And there is humor dark as old wine. A farmer shrugs when a neighbor dies, at least the rats will eat less. A mother whispers to a fussy child, hush, or the gravedigger will rock you to sleep. Cruel, yes, but cruelty is also comfort when tenderness has no teeth. You live with death the way you live with fleas. Annoyed, weary, but accustomed. You pass through alleys where coffins are carried by candlelight. You pause in fields where crows circle above a new mound. The sight is ordinary, the sound familiar, the smell unforgettable. And yet, because it is constant, life sharpens around it. Bread tastes more precious, laughter burns brighter. The sight of a sunrise feels like a victory. Each day alive is a day wrestled from a grave not yet dug. When death comes, it does not slip quietly away. It announces itself not only in grief, but in ritual. The body is washed sometimes with water, sometimes with wine if coin permits. Hands are folded, eyes closed with care. A candle is placed at the head, its wax dripping slow like hours running out. You can smell the sharpness of herbs tucked into clothes. Sage, rosemary, sometimes lavender to mask the inevitable. But no herb ever wins long against decay. Neighbors gather. Women keen in voices that pierce the rafters, their cries both sincere and practiced. Children fidget, half frightened, half curious. A priest arrives, his breath tinged with ale, his hands steady with the cross. Latin rolls from his tongue, phrases as heavy as bells. To you the words are more sound than meaning, but sound is enough, it wraps the silence in structure. Then comes the procession. The coffin's simple wood, or merely a shroud, carried through streets. Torches flicker, wax drips, chants, echo. You follow the line, feet sinking into mud, watching as familiar lanes look strange by firelight. The town pauses, doors open, heads bow. For a moment, all quarrels are silenced by the sight of mortality passing. At the churchyard, the grave waits dark. Open the earth's mouth yawning. The smell is damp raw like stone soaked in rain. The priest sprinkles holy water, lime is scattered, and the body is lowered. Dirt falls in dull thuds, a sound you never forget. The grave closes, but the memory remains open. Afterward, the wake-ale poured, bread-broken stories told. Laughter mingles with tears because grief does not travel alone. Someone jokes that the deceased will finally stop complaining about taxes. Another swears they saw his ghost on the road already begging for one more loaf. Death is not an end, but a transformation into story. And stories matter. The living remember the dead in tales told by firesides and names given to newborns and masses paid for by coins scraped together. The poor might buy one candle. The rich might endow a chapel. But whether small or grand, all are gestures against forgetting. You stand there smelling wax and earth hearing prayers and laughter, feeling the chill of a graveyard wind. You realize death is not only a private loss, but a public ritual, a rehearsal of what everyone knows awaits them. And in that ritual, the medieval world makes peace with its harshest truth, that memory is the only immortality most will ever have. You feel it when a raven lands on a roof, its beady eyes reflecting firelight. Neighbors mutter someone inside will die. A dog howling at midnight means a soul has already left. Dreams of teeth falling from your mouth foretell funerals. Comets blazing across the night sky are omens, fiery letters written by God to announce plague or war. Even the sudden silence of birds at dawn makes a woman clutch her child tighter, whispering prayers against the unseen. Bodies themselves were read like texts. A lingering cough was not just illness, it was the first word in death's sentence. Bruises that appeared without cause, surely signs of spirits bruising the soul. A withered crop was not only weather, but a reminder that the reaper stalks fields both green and human. Death was everywhere, written into the smallest details of life. And because it was everywhere, people rehearsed it constantly. The memento mori, remember you must die, was carved into rings painted on walls, even embroidered into cloth. Skulls smiled from manuscripts, skeletons danced beside kings. Not as horror, but as reminder, you cannot outrun this partner, so you might as well learn its steps. You see the irony, a world that lived with fleas, filth, and famine still found energy to decorate death with art. Perhaps because ignoring it was impossible, they chose instead to stare. Some found humor in it, black and biting. A jester might quip at a funeral that the deceased finally escaped taxes. A farmer seeing his neighbor struck by lightning mutters that at least God saved him from next winter's hunger. Cruel, yes. But cruelty was a way to laugh at the inevitable, to strip death of the dignity it demanded. But obsession also meant fear. Demons were believed to stalk the dying, eager to snatch souls before last rites could be given. Families rushed for priests as soon as breath grew ragged, desperate to put a cross between body and hell. The smell of wax and oil would fill the room. Psalms muttered urgently, the dying person's hand trembling as it traced a final cross. You feel the terror in that moment, not only of leaving, but of leaving unprepared. And then there were ghosts. Villagers swore the dead walked restless if buried without proper rites, or if debts remained unpaid. A pale figure glimpsed in the fields meant unfinished business. Stories spread of monks hearing knocks on cloister doors only to find graves freshly disturbed. Children huddled closer, mothers locked shutters, and still the tales grew. Death was not only an end, it was a constant companion, shaping behavior long before it arrived. You live with it in every prayer, every superstition, every glance at the churchyard. You breathe it with the incense, you taste it in the bitterness of herbs burned against plague, you carry it like an uninvited guest. And perhaps that is why life, for all its hardships, clung so stubbornly. Bread was sweeter because tomorrow it might be gone. Ale was warmer because next winter might silence your laughter. Love, even bound in dowries and duties, was cherished because death hovered always at the door. You realize that this obsession was not only fear, it was also fuel. To remember death was to sharpen life. When death finally came, it took breath but left paperwork. Inheritance was not only about fields and cattle, it was about memory, about how you wished to be seen once you no longer could speak. You sit at a table that smells of ink and wax. The scribe dips his quill, scratches Latin across parchment. Your name, your possessions, your wishes, all listed carefully. Candles for the souls of the dead, alms for the poor, masses to be sung every year on the anniversary of your passing. The church is never forgotten. Priests remind you that heaven prefers receipts. You leave coins for them, not because you trust their prayers more than others, but because eternity is a debt collector no one dares ignore. Then comes the family. Land to the eldest tools, to the younger dowries reinforced for daughters. You imagine their faces reading these lines: disappointment, relief, jealousy. A cow can divide siblings more than 100 insults ever could. A silver spoon once shared in childhood meals becomes a relic to be fought over. Even in death, you sow disputes. But you also leave softer things. A ring given to a son because he once stared at it as a boy. A cloak to a daughter because she always shivered in winters. These gestures, inked in margins or whispered on deathbeds, become treasures heavier than gold. They are tokens of memory, attempts to be more than a name on a stone. For the poor, wills are simpler. A pot, a blanket, a handful of coins, maybe nothing but instructions. Light one candle for me. Yet even here, memory insists. A neighbor recalls a kindness, a grandchild remembers a lullaby. In a world where wealth isn't even, memory is the only inheritance guaranteed. Funerary monuments speak loudly of this desire. Nobles raise tombs carved with armor, and angels their faces frozen in stone piety. Merchants pay for slabs engraved with ships and wares, proof that trade can reach eternity. Even peasants, when possible, scratch names into wood, hoping the letters outlast the rot. Each marker is a plea, do not forget. And yet memory is fragile. Rain washes names from stones. Fires consume records. Children die before they can pass stories forward. The thread is easily cut, and then all you were, your land, your laugh, your labor, fades into silence. But perhaps that is why communities work so hard to remember. Feast days are kept for saints' anniversaries, for patrons, prayers for ancestors. A candle lit in a chapel is not only flame, it is defiance. A name spoken at a table is not only tradition, it is resistance against oblivion. You can smell it now, beeswax melting incense, curling parchment, drying by firelight. You hear the scratch of quills, the murmur of priests, the laughter it wakes. Death has come, yes, but memory wrestles with it, refusing to let go. You feel the warmth of that fragile defiance, imperfect, fleeting, but human. In the end, wills and legacies are less about possessions than about the ache to linger. To be remembered is to remain alive in someone's story, if only for a few more breaths of history. And so you walk past the churchyard once more, eyes tracing stones, ears catching names muttered by mourners. The dead sleep, but their memory hums faint but insistent, like a candle that refuses to gutter out. The candles in the chapel burn low, their flames shrinking into trembling points of light. Outside the churchyard lies silent stones leaning under the weight of centuries. You step away carrying the scents of wax and earth, the whispers of names half forgotten, the steady reminder that every story bends toward silence. Yet silence is not all there is. In the laughter of children, in the scratch of a plow, in the songs rising at feast, you realize memory is not only carved in stone, but carried in living breath. The medieval day, with its hunger, faith, danger, and fragile joys, has unfolded and folded again. You have walked it from dawn to dusk, from cradle to grave, from bread to ashes. And now, as the last shadows fall and night presses gently once more, it is time to rest. The past has told its stories, its echoes have settled, and the weight of centuries grows soft like a blanket drawn up against your chin. Ahead lies only quiet sleep, waiting, timeless, patient. You have walked an entire day and night in the medieval world through hunger and feast, dirt and devotion, danger and punishment, kinship and inheritance, death and memory. Each moment was heavy with struggle, yet also stitched with stubborn endurance. Life was never gentle, but people found ways to make it bearable. Bread passed at a table, prayers whispered in smoky chapels, laughter stolen even at funerals. The lesson is not that they lived better or worse, but that they lived fully in the face of limits. Every scratch of a quill, every hum of a lullaby, every flicker of candlelight was an act of resistance against forgetting. And though centuries have passed, you carry those voices tonight. They remind you that memory itself is a kind of immortality. The dead remain as long as their stories are told. So as you drift now into your own sleep, let the weight of history settle gently. Imagine the crackle of fire in a cold hall, the hum of monks chanting the faint warmth of straw under your back. Let the noise of disputes, punishments, and prayers dissolve into stillness. The past has done its work. Your only duty now is rest. Sleep then deep and untroubled. May the echoes of history guard your dreams, and may dawn find you with the quiet strength of those who lived, endured, and were remembered.